and that it shows. Cause like I haven't eaten real food in a month, but I still want to eat cake. What? Then we change the way we eat and say, this time I swear what I eat is gonna change. But we end up ordering out anyway. I buy produce we don't use, it spoils, I feel bad. Ordered out again last night, but this time I'm telling you, we are never, ever, ever eating bad together. We are never, ever, ever eating bad together. We could eat all kinds of fruits and veggies if we please, but we are never, ever, ever, ever eating bad together. Like, ever. I'm really gonna miss the Halloween candy and all the refined sugar that we buy. And you will hide away a piece of pecan pie, some kind of store-bought brand much richer than mine. This used to be pizza night, but this time I'm telling you, we are never, ever, ever eating bad together. We are never, ever, ever eating bad together. We could eat all kinds of ancient grains instead of wheat, but we are never, ever, ever, ever eating bad together. Yeah. I used to eat terribly. I ate whatever, ever, but now we could eat better together. No, we are never, ever, ever eating bad together. We are never, ever, ever eating bad together. You go eat, your friends eat with my friends, eat with me. But we are never, ever, ever, ever eating bad together. Eating bad together. Eating bad together. You go eat with your friends, eat with my friends, eat with me. But we are never, ever, ever eating bad together. No, we
Hello. Good morning, everyone. That was, once again, We Are Never Eating Bad Together. That was Abigail Stauffer on vocals, lyrics by Lucas Sagia, and direction and editing by Peter Johnston. So let's give that a hand again. That was awesome.
We'd like to welcome everybody to the 5th Annual Homegrown Local Food Summit. Woo! So my name is Amanda.
I'm Sarah.
And we are extremely excited that you're here today. As you probably noticed, this year's theme is reimagining a fair food system. And in a way, I really think that that fair food is the reason why we first conceived of having local food summits. But this year, I think it's really important that we focus on some topics that we maybe haven't addressed in the past. And so I'm really excited that we have this environment here where we can really have these conversations and definitely create positive change in our community.
So we just want to talk for 1 second about what do we hope to get out of today? Why are we all here? And I think it kind of goes without saying, we're primarily all here to eat really good food today. We really do have an amazing menu today. We have food from local vendors, local farms, prepared by local chefs. So it's all really good. Did you guys enjoy breakfast? Yeah. Woo! All right. I can tell some of you are like here physically, but I think mentally you're still out enjoying breakfast. And join us when you're ready, that's fine. So, and another reason we're here is to have good conversation. Really, part of today is all about creating this space, and we want to have those conversations. We want to make those connections that really build a strong community. Because I believe, and I think I speak for all of us when I say we believe that having a strong community enables you to make those changes, to make a better food system. And if today we can just share our ideas, share our knowledge, and share our enthusiasm, I think that'll go a long way. And finally, as Amanda touched on, we're here to talk about and define, kind of in our own words, what exactly is a fair food system. I know a lot of us are coming here today with different ideas about what exactly that means, and maybe the idea you came in with will be completely different than the idea you're going to walk out of here today with, and that's fine. We kind of hope that's the case. But I think there is one thing that we can all agree on, and that is whatever a fair food system is to you, we're not there yet. We don't quite have it. There's a lot of issues that are really powerful here in our very own community, issues about fair pay, issues about working conditions, issues about racism. And this is a really good starting point to address those so that we can all start to move forward together.
So you might have noticed that there are a lot of us running around in these really awesome t-shirts. And you are definitely welcome to stop any of us and ask questions if you ever have them throughout the day. Also, this year we have a Twitter hashtag. If anybody is on Twitter, it's hashtag LFS 2013. And before we get started, we also really just want to say a couple huge thank yous. Number one, to Washtenaw Community College for sharing this wonderful space with us, and in particular to their Culinary Arts and Hospitality Management program. Their faculty and their students have just been amazing working with us to make this all happen. We also, yes. And we also want to say a big thank you to the People's Food Co-op and to Whole Foods Market for their generous support. Thank you. And just thank you overall to all of our sponsors for today. We really couldn't do this without you. So we are extremely excited to have all of you here today for good food and great conversation. Welcome to Local Food Summit.
Thank you also for bearing with us. We know the weather has kind of thrown some things off a little bit, so we might have to be a little flexible with the schedule today, but we'll try to keep things rolling and we'll keep you guys updated. So enjoy.
Now I'm going to introduce Oran Hesterman, who will be introducing our keynote. Oran B. Hesterman, PhD, is president and CEO of the Fair Food Network, a national nonprofit organization working at the intersection of food systems, sustainability, and social equity to guarantee access to healthy, fresh, and sustainably grown food, especially in underserved communities. His book, Fair Food, Growing a Healthy, Sustainable Food System for All, published in June 2011, has been recognized by leaders in the field and the national media as a must-read. During his 30-year career, Hesterman has become a national leader in sustainable agriculture and food systems and has made significant contributions to funding healthy food and farming nationwide. A native of Berkeley, California, he started his career as an organic farmer and then established one of the first sprout businesses in America in 1973. He sold the business to attend graduate school at the University of Minnesota, where he earned his doctorate in agronomy, plant genetics, and business administration. He now lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm really excited to say that he and the Fair Food Network are definitely an integral part of our local food system here in Washtenaw County, and are doing great work working towards a fair food system in Michigan and nationwide. Help me give a warm welcome to Oran B. Hesterman.
Good morning. It's good to be here with you on this typical February morning in Michigan. Talking with Saru, who is here today, and we're really fortunate to have her here with us today, talking about issues of fair food and food justice, and we'll be on a panel together. But I know, Saru has spent time in Brooklyn, New York, and out in the Bay Area, And she was just happy that she could make it here from the Detroit airport this morning. And I know that we are still waiting for the arrival of our keynote speaker. So I'm going to do a long-winded introduction. And actually, those of you who know me know that I'm never at a lack for words. So we don't have a problem here, but I may have to adjust the timing of how I'm doing this depending on when I see Malik get here, and we'll let him take a deep breath too. He's battling the snow on the roads this morning. So it's really a pleasure for me when I learned that the focus of this year's local food summit was going to be imagining or reimagining a fair food system. I mean, you can imagine leading an organization called Fair Food Network, how much we appreciate the attention starting to be paid on this issue of fairness and justice in the food system. And while we're going to have a panel a little later on, a few of us talking about in more depth, what does it mean to have a fair food system, I thought I would start out this morning by simply saying, from my perspective, it's pretty simple. It means a system that's healthy, green, fair, and affordable. So it means a system that's healthy. It's producing food that's healthy for our bodies and our communities. Green means it's being grown in a way that's healthy for the environment. Fair, to me, means it's a system that, while we produce, process, distribute, sell our food, especially in the production and processing end, nobody's getting exploited, that everybody is getting a fair piece of the economic pie in that food system. And affordable means everybody has access to the healthy, fresh food they need to lead a healthy life, healthy, green, fair, and affordable. I'm going to spend a minute talking about how we are actually implementing programs at Fair Food Network that try to follow these lines of a fair food system, and then I'm going to share some voices from some other folks actually in Detroit who are also working on these issues. So as you heard Amanda say, the mission of Fair Food Network is to assure that everybody has access to healthy, fresh, and sustainably grown food, and really looking at that as a basic right, not a privilege only for those of us who have the money to afford it and a great farmer's market, for example, in downtown Ann Arbor, but that everybody should have access to the healthy, fresh, and sustainably grown food they need to lead a healthy life. One of the programs you may know about that Fair Food Network has implemented now statewide in Michigan and in a few markets in Ohio, and now being asked to help implement this all over the country, is the Double Up Food Bucks program, where anybody who comes to our participating farmers market with their Michigan Bridge card, their food stamp card, gets double their money. So if they buy $20 worth of produce, it's a program that I am very proud of. I'm proud of our staff for leading it. Rachel, are you here this morning? Rachel Chatterd and Bear, and Dan, I see you up there too. I mean, Rachel has done a fabulous job bringing this program to farmers markets all over the state of Michigan. It's really having Michigan now lead the Midwest in SNAP sales at farmers markets, which is now actually one of the indicators that our governor in the state is using for community wellness. He's looking at the increase in SNAP sales at farmers markets as one sign, and we're very pleased that this program and this approach is getting attention at the policy levels, both in the state and nationally. So Double Up Food Bucks is one way that we are addressing this issue and connecting it to public policy, because we believe that you change a system by changing public policy, by changing the policies that drive it. And we believe we can do a much better job with the major resource flow in our federal food and ag system, and that is SNAP, or what used to be called food stamps. But that's not all we're doing. We're also, for example, assisting a group of urban farmers in Cleveland with creating hoop house production and season extension in Cleveland. And our great staff person, Liz Cohn, who's right here. Liz, raise your hand. Let's recognize you, is doing this great job. both here locally and with our programs in Cleveland. We also have Lucinda Kurtz here, who I have to say is a great outreach coordinator and also my wife, and an absolute fabulous supporter of all I have been doing and all we have been doing at Fair Food Network. So thank you. And I know Myra Lee was going to, Myra, are you here? Not here yet. Myra Lee is one of our staff. We now have an office in Detroit with 3 staff at that office, and Myra is one of them, so she may be here a little bit late as well. Another project that Fair Food Network is involved in that you, I'm sure, are going to hear more about is a project with a number of partners around the state to create what's called a Healthy Food Finance Fund for the state of Michigan. And that is building an investment fund that will have the capital available for entrepreneurs who are interested in creating a new or expanded healthy food retail opportunities. And this would be everything from grocery stores to farmers markets to farm stands to mobile markets to food hubs. And we're working with some national organizations, some national foundations, and I believe by this time next year we'd be able to announce that there is a Healthy Food Finance Fund to help actually finance these kinds of operations in the state of Michigan. So a lot of great work going on, and I'm just so proud of our staff at Fair Food Network and all of our partners and supporters for this work. Now, even though at Fair Food Network we focus primarily on food access and affordability as the aspect of the fair food system that we work on, we also know it doesn't stop there. That a fair food system really, you need to talk about not just equitable access to healthy food, but also equitable access to good paying jobs in the food system, and equitable access to the resources it takes to produce food, to process food and distribute it, so more people can get involved in the economic benefit of what is a really huge piece of our economy locally, regionally, and nationally. You know, there's this Chinese proverb says if you give a person a fish they eat for a day, I'm sure you've heard this, right? If you teach them how to fish, they eat for a lifetime. But the real issue is who owns the pond. You know, who has access to the pond? And so when we talk about a fair food system, we need to talk not just about who knows how to fish and who has a fishing pole, but also all of the policies and practices around ownership and who has access to the basic resources for production and for being part of this whole food system economically. So during the day today, we are all going to hear from each other a lot, and you're going to hear from others who are here in the room, in the auditorium, and on campus with us. But I wanted to take just a few minutes this morning to also hear from some folks who are not here today in the city 45 miles from here, where the issues of food access and food justice are probably as, if not more important than anywhere we would go in the country. And I want to do that by showing you a short video. I want to let you know we've just produced this at Fair Food Network. It's actually the first time it's being shown in public. And so, Josh, let's show the video now. It's just about a 4-minute long video.
Detroit. I hope you're doing well this evening. Tonight we're talking about how Detroiters are trying to put healthy food on the table and the issues that they face doing so, and we certainly want your voice to be heard.
I have to go outside of Detroit in order to get healthy food.
Over the last 20, 30 years, Detroit has lost major food chains.
But I think the economics is what really drives a lot of food insecurity for a lot of Detroiters.
Why is food so high? Why do you have to go farther out to get some food where you can afford to feed your family for the rest of the month?
I don't have access to a car to go outside the city. Our fruit is dry. Our meat, our rock is rotten. We don't have a choice.
Majority population in this city has a lack of access to fresh fruits and vegetables, and that is the reason for the health diseases that are impacting our community.
Protecting food as a basic need and necessity for children, particularly families, particularly in our urban areas, is critically important.
How do we kind of say this is a human need and a right for people to have certain access?
Detroit is worthy of every revitalization effort possible. We're at a magic moment right now where we can make some significant things happen.
We have an opportunity in Detroit to build a food environment that enables every family to have access to healthy, fresh, and sustainably grown food in their neighborhood at an affordable price. We need public policies that support more retail establishments with healthy food.
In my dreams, I would see a corner store at every block selling healthy food.
We're working on going to non-conventional funding mechanisms in order for up-and-coming entrepreneurs who want to purchase a grocery store. They have the opportunity and also the funding to do so.
We'd like to see much more urban farming in the city of Detroit.
If every block where at least one vacant house or vacant lot is, to turn into something that can benefit the community.
If we can create an opportunity for locally grown products to then be able to make it into the school system.
That would help ramp up the local farming movement tremendously.
I wish they had more healthy food.
Getting federal funding into SNAP incentive programs such as Double Up Food Bucks for people to purchase healthy food at farmers markets and other places.
If they can actually go use those in the local grocery stores would be a big plus.
Public policies that create direct transportation routes, so those people who are taking public transit can easily get to grocery stores and farmers markets. If we are going to change public policy so it supports a vibrant and healthy food system, we need to bring together the many varied voices that are concerned about this issue, so we have a single, strong voice with which to communicate with policymakers about those needed changes.
Clearly, individual voices are not as powerful as collective voices. And so we have much more impact if we speak collectively.
Anytime you get a group of qualified people in a room like this who are talking about food and food options and access to healthy food, it's going to resonate.
Sometimes people feel like, what can I do about something so big? But if we create a huge network and of relationships and conversations about this, I think people can feel more empowered, that I do have a voice.
We realize that we're part of this bigger sustainable food system and this bigger network of partners who are all working on the same goal.
What the Detroit Voices Project does is really helps join the community around the table talking about an issue that affects us all.
Everybody is understanding this is an issue that we need to solve for the health of our kids and the health of our future. I'll tell you, Malik, you are absolutely right on time. This is fabulous. I've got to tell you, this is absolutely amazing timing because I was about to do some stand-up comedy here, waiting for him. So you are very fortunate that Malik arrived when he did. So as Malik is taking a deep breath, and thank you, Malik, for braving the roads between Detroit and here this morning. to be with us. I mean, I drove just for a few minutes from home and know that the roads were a challenge. So Malik doesn't know that you just saw him in the video that we just showed. So you got a little snippet of some of what he has to say, and we are really privileged to be able to hear more from Malik this morning. Malik Yakini is an activist and an educator who's committed to freedom and justice for African people in particular and for all of humankind, really. He's the founder and executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. He was the driving force behind creating the Detroit Food Policy Council and has been a member of the Michigan Food Policy Council statewide. For about 2 decades, as he was getting more and more involved in the local food, healthy food, sustainable food, and food justice movements, he served as the executive director of the Nasroma Institute Public School Academy, one of Detroit's leading African-centered schools, and he's received many awards as an educator in that respect. He views the good food revolution as part of the larger movement for freedom, justice, and equity. Most recently, Malik was awarded a Food and Community Fellowship from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, really a coveted award that people compete for from all over the country, and we were very fortunate, I think, locally here to have Malik participate in that program and contribute nationally as he does, but also really helping him hone his skills for communication right here in this community. You know, each of us, if we are fortunate enough, find from time to time someone who we can count as both a friend and a teacher. Someone who can expand our worldviews, challenge our assumptions, while also remaining very supportive and solid in that support. I consider myself to be one of those fortunate people, to be able to call Malik Yakini both a teacher and a friend. And I would like you to join me with a warm welcome for Malik Yakini.
Good morning, how's everyone? It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Oran. I also count Oran as one of my teachers and friends. So it's a mutual admiration society. Claire, how are you? It's good to see you. Lucinda, it's good to see you. That's it. I always start by first giving praise to the Creator, and for me this work is a spiritual work, and so I always have to kind of put that forward first. And also recognizing the tremendous contribution that the ancestors of African American people generally have given to American society. And also I always want to recognize my personal ancestors, those in my bloodline, whose shoulders I stand on. It's really a pleasure to be here in the Morris Lawrence building. And this is the first time in close to 40 years I've been to Washtenaw Community College. It's been a while since I've been here. But I had the pleasure of knowing Morris Lawrence when I was a student at Eastern Michigan University in the 1970s, and I can tell you he was a profound man. He was rotund and profound. I don't know if any of you knew Morris Lawrence or not, but he was an ethnomusicologist, and I had the good fortune when I was doing a radio show on WEMU of being able to do extensive interviews with Morris Lawrence, and I was very impressed by his knowledge of music generally, but specifically of the history and the impact of African American music. And interestingly, I was fired from WEMU. In fact, I majored in radio broadcasting, and I'm proud to say that I've either been fired from every radio job I've had, or or the show has been canceled, one or the other. But just prior to my departure from WEMU, and I'm saying this because I think the statute of limitations is over, but we had a big struggle with the management at WEMU about really who owned the public airwaves. And it was our position that the public owns the public airwaves, and it was WEMU's management's position that they controlled it. And so we had a real struggle about having community members come into the radio station and help produce programs and training community people to do radio production. But anyway, the bottom line, before my departure from the station, while I still had my keys, one night we went in and liberated all of the tapes from the shows that we had done. So I have still boxes and boxes of tape with all these valuable interviews, including the interview with Morris Lawrence. So I will, at some point in the near future, digitize that and make that interview available, as well as many of the others. So I just want to, I'm saying that just to acknowledge the great contributions of Morris Lawrence, since we're in a building that's named after him. I also want to thank Amanda Edmonds and the good folks at Growing Hope who are doing fantastic work here in Ypsilanti. I want. You know, Amanda is like the Energizer Bunny. In fact, whenever I talk to her, I get kind of tired just because she's moving so fast all the time. It's amazing. But they're doing very good work, and I had the chance to visit their headquarters last summer. She gave us a tour, and I'm just very impressed with what they're doing with the building, and also what they're doing with food in Ypsilanti. And also, it's a great farmers market that exists in Ypsilanti. I had the chance to visit a couple times last year and shop there. I also want to thank all of those, you know, typically when gatherings like this occur, there's lots of people behind the scenes that make things happen, and there's people behind the scenes whose faces you never see. So I don't know the names of all of those people, but I want to acknowledge all of them. And similarly, in the food system, we have all these people kind of in the back of the house that do all the work and make things happen, and we never see them. But they're really the kind of fuel that moves things forward. So I want to recognize all of the people who put time into making this happen, including folks like the janitors who are responsible for cleaning up, and folks who do setup, and folks who are doing the technology today, and all of the people, the team of people that really make things like this happen. So I want to bring you greetings from two organizations, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, which I have the honor of serving as executive director of, and also of the Detroit Food Policy Council, which I had the honor and sacred trust of serving as chair of from its inception in 2009 until I was term limited in May of this year. And we purposely put term limits on because we're concerned about nurturing new leadership and not having kind of the same old faces and the same old heads always being the ones that are leading things. So we're very concerned about nurturing new leadership. And so we built into the bylaws of the Detroit Food Policy Council term limits so that we can consciously and intentionally nurture new leadership. How many people like stories? You know, for most of my adult life, I've worked exclusively in the African American community. And really, I got my organizing start here we're in Ann Arbor, but back down the road in Ypsilanti. I see. When I was a student at Eastern Michigan University, I was the chairman of the Black Student Association from 1974 to 1978. And we ran a free breakfast program at Perry Elementary School on the south side of Ypsilanti. And we spent a lot of time organizing in the, is it called Parkside Projects? Is that what it's called? Park Ridge, thank you. And oh yeah, we had another community program in the Park Ridge Community Center where we worked with children in that neighborhood. But I got a chance to really learn how to go door to door and talk to people and kind of try to motivate people to participate in the programs that we had going on. So, at the time, I had never heard the word food security, anything like that. But we were trying to kind of emulate the programs of the Black Panther Party. And so we were able to convince the administration of Eastern Michigan University to pay for this food. And we got also donations, I think, from United Way and some other foundations. But every morning we would load up cars at EMU, drive to the south side of Ypsilanti very early in the morning, prepare breakfast for a couple hundred children, and then also have cultural activities because we were concerned about politicizing them. And I guess in a sense that was the beginning not only of my organizing work, but maybe of my food work as I look back. So today is fulfilling for me because it's kind of in a sense the closing of a circle or the completion of a circle. So I was saying that to say that most of the times I've spoken to groups, they've been predominantly African American groups. And maybe 6-7 years ago, I was on a panel in Detroit at the Detroit Athletic Club, which is like a real ritzy kind of place. I felt strange even going inside of there. And that's where I met Oran Hesterman. And no. See, they misinterpreted what I'm saying. But Oran seemed to feel that there was some value in what I had to say that day. And for some reason, my message resonated with him, and perhaps I was a voice from Detroit that he hadn't heard before. And in fact, I think a few folks that day were saying, well, who is this guy? We haven't heard of him before. And so after that, Oran invited me to go to San Francisco and to speak on a panel with Saru, who's also presenting here today. And that kind of began my speaking to predominantly white audiences. And so at first, when I first started doing that didn't go too well because I started talking about white supremacy and all of the white people were like shut down, right? They wouldn't hear what I was saying. And so over time, I've learned how to speak to predominantly white audiences in a way that doesn't frighten people and doesn't cause people to shut down. And so one of the things I've learned is that humor plays a role. And so I want to start with a story that I think is humorous, but also perhaps there's some lessons in it that can be extracted that have some relationship to the food system. So some of you might have heard this story before. In fact, I call this a classic story retold, and this story is called The Little Red Hen. This, by the way, is a participatory story. In the African-American tradition, we have something we call call and response. And so I'm not just going to be talking to you, but I need you to participate in this as well. So you'll see when it's time for you to participate. Once upon a time, in a village in Africa, a hen scratched about the yard until she uncovered some grains of wheat. She called to her neighbors and said, if we plant this wheat, we can have bread to eat. Who will help me plant it? Not I, said the cow. I thought slavery was over. Now I have to explain that. And it's not good when you have to explain jokes, but in the work that I've done with African American youth in gardening, almost invariably within 15 minutes of them doing the work of being on the farm, there's some reference made to slavery. Either you're working me like a slave, or I thought slavery was over, or because that's the lens through which many African Americans view agricultural work. So anyway, it's like I say, it's not good when you have to explain a joke, but some of the other jokes I won't have to explain in this. Not I, said the goat, it probably won't grow anyway. Not I, said the duck, I'm much too busy. Not I, said the lamb, I don't do dirt. Then I will, said the little red hen, and this is where you join in. You have to say, and she did. And she did. After a few months, the wheat grew tall and ripened into golden grains reaching up towards the sun. Beneficial insects and beautiful birds began to return to the village. The little red hen again called to her neighbors, who will help me harvest the wheat? Not I, said the cow. My stomach's ache. Not I, said the goat. I don't really get involved with groups. Not I, said the duck. I have a wheat allergy. Not I, said the lamb. My favorite rapper, Young Shepherd, is performing in a free concert this afternoon. Then I will harvest it myself, said the little red hen. The hen carried the wheat back to her house and asked her neighbors, who will help me grind the wheat into flour? Not I, said the cow. I already have 2 jobs. Not I, said the goat. I don't have anyone to watch my kids. Not I, said the duck. You're trying to get paid. I'm trying to get paid. I'm sorry. Not I, said the lamb. You running game, hen. You're trying to pull the wool over my eyes. Then I will grind it myself, said the little red hen. Yes, she did. After resting from the exhausting work of grinding the grain, the little red hen made one last attempt to appeal to her neighbors for help. Who will help me make this flour into dough and bake the bread? She was met with the usual litany of excuses. Not I, said the cow. Chewing cud takes all the energy I've got. Not I, said the goat. My kids have music lessons. Not I, said the duck. My cousin Donald and his family are visiting from out of town. Not I, said the lamb. I'm studying for my real estate license. Then I will bake the bread myself, said the little red hen. As the aroma of freshly baked bread drifted out into the village, the little red hen's neighbors began to gather outside of her door. Who will help me eat this bread, said the little red hen. I will, said the cow. I will, said the goat. I will, said the duck. I will, said the lamb. No, you won't, said the little red hen. None of you practiced ujima, collective work and responsibility. However, my beloved neighbors, I didn't grind all of the grain. I started a seed bank to have wheat for next year. Here's a handful of grain for each of you, and she sent them packing. As the little red hen sat down to enjoy her still warm bread with honey from the beehives that her friend Abba maintained at a local farm, the goat, the cow, the duck, and the lamb called a meeting to form an organic, sustainable farming collective. The next season, they all worked together to plant, harvest, and grind their wheat and bake bread. There was plenty for all. They donated some to the animals who were homeless or sick and sold the surplus at farmers markets in neighboring villages. Their village continued to prosper and eventually started manufacturing farming and baking equipment. The little red hen was elected chief of the village council. So what I found, if I can get white people to start laughing first, then when I start talking about white supremacy, I don't have to worry about finding where the back door is, anything like that. So I want to talk to you about the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, and hopefully there's some lessons that can be gleaned from our work. In fact, I think what's important about what we're doing is we're creating a model. We're not creating the model, but we're creating a model that people can extract things from that they find to be valuable and that can use in their own locale. So hopefully you'll see some things in this that resonate with you and that you find to be valuable. So I'm unapologetically from Detroit. In fact, just like the folks in Ypsi, when I mentioned Ypsilanti, it was like, yeah. Right, I'm the same way about Detroit. So, and many of us are, in spite of the challenges Detroit has, we're very proud to be from Detroit and very proud of our community and have such a love for the place that we come from. So I have the opportunity now to travel around the country quite a bit, and wherever I go, again, I always represent Detroit proudly. It's the city that gave the Model T Ford and the mass production, the assembly line style of production to the world, which I suppose is a mixed blessing. I guess cars in one sense made our lives easier, but the more I learn about the internal combustion engine, the more I realize it truly is a mixed blessing because it has tremendously detrimental impacts on the environment. Detroit is also the place that gave Verner's Ginger Ale to the world, Betty Bebop Carter, and those guys in the lower left-hand side who I wanted to be like when I was a young man, the Tempting Temptations and the Motown sound. However, in 2013, Detroit is in crisis, and it is in some ways the poster child for urban decay, which is one of the reasons there's so much interest in the work that's being done in Detroit, because people all around the world are trying to see what are people going to do in this post-industrial city. How are we going to reimagine what our city can become? And this photograph I really like because I think it illustrates, just in a snapshot, kind of the best and the worst of Detroit in a sense, or maybe the worst and the worst, maybe. In the foreground of the picture, you see one of the many abandoned factories, and I think that's the Packard plant there, that has been closed since the 1950s. So you have this hulking giant that is that provides refuge to drug addicts, and there's been several fires there, and there's all kind of unsavory activities that take place there. Then in the background, you see the Renaissance Center, which is currently the world headquarters of the General Motors Corporation. So we have this contrast between corporate wealth and unbridled capitalism and the poverty that occurs in the aftermath, after corporations kind of run and extract the resources and, get what they need out of a community, then that's the kind of thing that's left. In 1950, Detroit had a population of 2 million people at its height. And according to the 2010 census, we now have 713,000 people, 81% of whom are African American. Detroit's unemployment rate is consistently twice the national average. The current mayor, Dave Bing, says that in some parts of the city, the unemployment rate is probably closer to 50%. In the 30-year period between 1970 and 2000, there were 161,000 buildings demolished, and there's thousands of others awaiting demolition as the city tries to get money to do that. As a result, there's 103,000 vacant lots in the city, which provide, at the same time, a tremendous opportunity, but also this tremendous blight. It's kind of a case of the cup being half full or half empty, depending on how you look at it. So many of us are seeing tremendous opportunity in this vacant land that exists in the city of Detroit, which is unique. Almost no other city in the United States has these vast expanses of unused or underutilized land. And so it provides the opportunity to kind of rethink about how land is used in the city and to rethink about how we integrate agriculture into urban areas. As of 2007, when Farmer Jack closed its stores in Detroit, its last stores, we have no national chain supermarkets in the city. That's a sharp contrast to the Detroit that I grew up in the 1960s, where we had maybe 6, 7, 8 national chains with multiple stores throughout the city of Detroit. So almost in every neighborhood, there was a full-service supermarket within walking distance of your home. And in the neighborhood I live in, and I'm fortunate to have lived in the same house for 53 years. In fact, that's highly unusual. And so it's given me the opportunity to see how my own community has evolved, or in a sense devolved. And so the A&P that used to be located within walking distance of my home has been a vacant lot for about the past 20 years. And a block from that vacant lot is where the headquarters of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network is. So I feel very fortunate to be based in the community that I grew up in. So currently we have no national chains, but we have a series of smaller markets in Detroit and grocery stores, many of which are owned by an ethnic minority from Iraq called Chaldeans. And I always want to clarify that I'm not anti-Chaldean. I don't want people to mistake what I'm saying. But the situation is we have a city which is largely African American, merchants who are largely Chaldean, and we have a situation where much of the wealth that is accumulated by these stores is not recirculated within our communities. And so that kind of situation is, that kind of wealth extraction scenario is not acceptable to many of us. We also have a problem with many of those merchants treating Detroiters in a disrespectful way. Many times women are hit on when they go to purchase things at smaller stores. And this is more at the, what we call party stores in Detroit, not the grocery stores. But clearly if a woman is going to buy a loaf of bread, she's not looking for a date, right? But often that's what happens. And what's ironic is that although many of these Chaldean merchants feel that they can talk to black women in a disrespectful way, if a black man went in a Chaldean community and spoke to Chaldean women in that manner, my guess is that he might not leave that community with his head still attached to his neck. So, you know, this problem of diminishing people of African descent is really a global problem, and it's part of this phenomenon of white supremacy. And so throughout the world, people are taught that African Americans have perhaps less value than other people. And, you know, I've had the chance to talk to international students, particularly some who went to the University of Detroit and who were kind of told, you know, watch how you relate to African Americans and things like that. So there's this kind of international image that's been projected. And so many times when merchants come here, they already have a view of African American people which is negative and feeds into the kind of disrespect that we too often see from some of the merchants that own these stores. In all fairness, because I don't want to overgeneralize, there are many of the Chaldean merchants who are treating people respectfully and who are trying to make sure their stores are clean and who are trying to make sure that food is not expired, but we have far too many who are doing the opposite. Something that's not often talked about is that 40,000 Detroit residents officially have their water shut off. And I say officially because when the water department comes around and shuts people's water off, typically about 15 minutes later, another van pulls out and some brothers will get out and knock on your door and say, for $25, I'll cut it back on. Now, I always have to tell people that I don't actually know any of those people who do that, and I don't actually know any of the people who had their water cut on like that, but rumor has it that those kinds of things happen in Detroit. But I do think having water is a human right, and regardless of your economic station in life. So I'm not mad at the folks who do that. In a word, Detroit is food insecure, as many areas around the country are. And I don't know if Oran has pitched his book today or not. If he hasn't, I'm going to do that right now. And just say that you really need to get this book, Fair Food. If you haven't gotten it and read it, it's really eye-opening. But one of the things that I've learned from Oran and others is that this food access situation, or what some people call food deserts, doesn't just exist in urban areas, but it also exists in rural areas. And so we have this problem throughout the United States. In fact, many of the people producing food live in areas that might be termed a food desert. I don't really like the term food desert, but they live in an area where they have serious food access challenges. And so this is a real problem throughout the United States that has to be addressed. So I want to talk to you about the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network and our response to this lack of food access in Detroit. We were formed in February of 2006 for 6 purposes. One, to influence public policy, because we understand that while we support communities exhibiting what we call kujichagulia, a Kiswahili word that means self-determination, that we support communities doing for themselves and not depending on the government or not depending on foundations, that they have to have the desire and the determination to change conditions in their community, regardless of who supports it or who doesn't support it. While we support that as our primary kind of mode of work, we also understand that it is important that the government be held accountable. Local, state, and national government has to be held accountable, and it has to be pressured to behave in a way which is responsible and which benefits the majority of people. And so we think that creating a public policy environment which is supportive of urban agriculture and supportive of access to good, healthy food is very important. Secondly, we were formed to promote urban agriculture because we think that it's part of the solution to this lack of food access. It's not the entire solution, but it certainly can play a large role. And we are inspired by examples like the people of Cuba in Havana, who are now producing something like 80% of the food that is consumed in that city right within the city limits. So we know that we can really ramp up food production in cities, and we can produce much more of the food that we're consuming near the places that it's being consumed. We were formed to promote also cooperative buying. And I'll say, frankly, that I am not a fan of capitalism at all. I don't think it's a system that really works well for the majority of human beings. If you're part of the 1%, as the Occupy movement taught us, it works pretty well for you. But for the rest of us, it doesn't work very well. And at one point, if you asked me, well, what is your ideology? I probably would have told you that I was a socialist of some sort. But as I grow older, I'm not really wedded to any ideological camp. In fact, I think that the problems that we face as a species are beyond any of the current ideologies that have been proposed, and that really we're going to have to come up with some solutions that don't exist at this time. And perhaps those solutions are going to draw from various philosophical schools and various ideologies. So we're going to have to create something new. And so I don't think we should be locked into thought patterns of the past, but we need to be future focused, to kind of taking with us as we move forward the best from the past, the concept that the people of Ghana call Sankofa, looking backward in order to move forward. We were formed also to promote healthy eating habits because although we can create greater access to food, we also have to really recapture some of our food culture and food ways. When I grew up, for the most part, families ate together. In most families, women prepared the food, and as a reforming chauvinist, I'm not advocating that happened, but that's how it was during the time I grew up. And so we had, fresh foods and nutritious meals, and this kind of food knowledge was passed down intergenerationally. Much of that has been lost. And so even if we provide greater access to food, we still have to raise people's consciousness about the impact, the importance of healthy food and ways to prepare it. I had an experience a couple of years ago with the school garden that I was affiliated with. We had one of the neighbors who was letting us use water from her house. And so in exchange, we brought her some produce. And I can remember giving her an eggplant and some beets. And she looked at it and she was like, what do I do with this? Right? So again, just having access is not sufficient. It's important, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So we also, as part of this movement, have to recapture our food culture and food ways and knowledge about food. And so that's also one of our purposes. Our fifth purpose was to facilitate mutual support among our members. I mentioned that we kind of stand on this platform that we call Kujichagulia, or self-determination. And so we think this, what's most important is the relationships that we build with each other. And then once the people are conscious and mobilized, that's the only way that you can hold politicians accountable, frankly. I don't have a lot of faith in most politicians. In fact, I think most of them are crass opportunists, and most of them don't stand firmly on principle. Not all, but most. At least that's been my experience. Maybe you know some politicians who are not scoundrels. But the only chance we have of holding politicians accountable is, again, people working collectively and creating vehicles to work cooperatively and presenting a compelling, and Claire, please forgive me for using this word, but presenting a compelling force that that encourages politicians to behave responsibly. Claire and I had these deep discussions, and so she kind of criticized me for using that word force. So I'm still evolving. Maybe I'll find another way of describing that. Our sixth purpose was to encourage young people to involve themselves in food careers, because we understand that this movement has to be an intergenerational movement. As a child of the 60s and someone who was an activist in the late 60s and the early 70s, one of the misconceptions we had was that a revolution is an event that, in fact, we used to talk in terms like, well, the deal's getting ready to go down. It's getting ready to happen, right? Because we thought maybe in 6 months, that there was going to be this drastic change in American society and this major shift of power and redistribution of resources. Clearly, that was very naive thinking. And so since that time, many of us have grown to understand that building a movement is an intergenerational process. And so if we want to sustain this movement, we have to have people who don't have lots and lots of gray in their beards and lots of gray in their hair involved, as well as the people. I mean, we need older folks and wisdom too, right? But we need young folks who are energized and mobilized in doing this work in order to sustain the work. There's many, many groups doing this work in Detroit. In fact, Detroit is in some ways the urban agriculture capital of the United States. And there's people who come to Detroit weekly, researchers. In fact, there's so many researchers approach us now. We're beginning to kind of create a rubric to make decisions about who we associate with or who we partner with to do research. And we're beginning to look at the concept we call research justice, because sometimes the research can be non-reciprocal. We don't really see many times where our community is benefiting from that. But the great interest is because there's such a large number of gardens and small farms in the city of Detroit, and so many people involved in this work. In fact, according to the Garden Resource Program, there were somewhere between 1,200 and 1,400 gardens registered with the Garden Resource Program last year in the city of Detroit. And so we have just this tremendous surge of energy around urban agriculture, and it's being done by a number of groups. I want to, in all fairness, say that I'm primarily representing the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, but we're not the only ones doing this work. And we work hand in hand with many of the other groups and individuals doing this work in Detroit. And in fact, perhaps one of our strengths in Detroit has been the collaboration that we've been able to build. But one of the things that distinguishes our group from many of the groups doing this work is that our group is primarily Detroit residents, primarily African Americans who live in the community and who are really trying to make conditions better for themselves. Unfortunately, in the food movement, often what we see is young, well-meaning whites who are working in communities of color. And again, they have golden intentions, but sometimes there's some problems if whites have not gone through a process. In fact, it's not really going through a process. It's really a continuing and ongoing life work of divesting themselves of the vestiges of white supremacist thinking. And it pervades every aspect of American society, and it's so subtle that often we don't see it. In fact, I was in Greensboro about 3 days ago doing a workshop on undoing racism in the food system, and one of the co-presenters on the panel I was in said, it's the water that we swim in. So it's almost invisible. It's the air that we breathe. So if well-meaning whites haven't gone through a process or not engaging in a process to divest themselves of a Eurocentric worldview and of white privilege and a way of looking at entering community that is more like a missionary than like a partner, then they can unintentionally cause harm. And so the thing that really distinguishes our group is that we have grown organically out of the community, and we think that that's the best type of movement, those that grow organically out of the communities they're designed to serve. Saru is in the house. She's another of my teachers, and I've learned a great deal from her about workers in the food system and workers in restaurants, and I just want to big her up in the work that she's doing, the work that Rock is doing, and just really encourage you to hear the panel that she's on and the panel that Oran's on today. So the programs that we engage in are a youth program called the Food Warriors Youth Development Program, which teaches young people about sustainable agriculture. It teaches them about the industrial food system that provides the majority of our food, and it teaches them to begin to take a look at the food access issues in their own community. We're concerned not only about creating greater access to fresh and healthy food, but we're also concerned about having control and influence over the means of distributing that food within our community. I used the term earlier, wealth extraction strategy, to describe some of the stores that exist in our community. And I would assert that even if we had the chain grocery stores in our community, that's not sufficient, because largely what they do is they suck out resources from our community and don't really empower communities by circulating the wealth that they accumulate as a result of the millions and millions of dollars that we spend on food. It's very similar to, in the colonial era, how the colonizing country would view the colonized. They would see them as markets to sell goods, and in many occasions, to dump goods that couldn't be sold in the so-called mother country. And that's still going on today, by the way. You know, drugs that the FDA bans in the United States many times are sold in other countries, or products which are deemed to be unsafe in the United States are sold in other countries. And so, in a sense, African-American communities and other communities of color throughout the United States serve as markets for these multinational corporations. And so we think that a better model is the cooperative model, which allows for communities to have ownership and to have decision-making over the means of selling food at the retail level in our communities. And so we're really strongly pushing this cooperative concept. So we currently have a monthly co-op buying club where members can go online and purchase from a catalog of thousands of products, purchase things at below retail price, and then a truck pulls up to our office once a month and we unload and divide people's orders up, and they're able to realize some savings on their food dollar. But that's just an interim step as we're working towards creating a brick and mortar retail food co-op, and so we made a great deal of progress. We've made a great deal of progress in that regard, and we've finished a feasibility study, and we're finishing a business plan now. We've had the chance to talk to the general managers of several co-ops in Michigan, including Oran here in, I keep saying here, but there in Ypsi, back down the road. And she was very forthcoming and shared lots and lots of valuable information about co-op development and management. And the same is true with the East Lansing Food Co-op and with the People's Co-op in Kalamazoo. They've been very helpful in our efforts to develop this food co-op in Detroit. And so we're expecting that sometime in the next 24 months, possibly by the end of 2014, that we'll actually open the door for our retail food co-op. We also understand, as I mentioned earlier, that it's not just enough to provide greater access to food, but we have to impact people's consciousness about food, where it comes from, who benefits from it, the economics of food, the nutritional aspects of it. So public education is a large part of what we do. We have a lecture series called the What's for Dinner lecture series. It's co-sponsored by the Detroit Public Library. It will begin its 4th season this April. And then finally, we participate and help to provide leadership to an effort which is now called Uprooting Racism, Planting Justice. It used to be called Undoing Racism in the Detroit Food System. And we are very concerned about the impact of race on food access and on food inequities. And so whenever we have the chance to speak to audiences, we always raise this issue and try to get people to think more critically about that. Our largest, most labor-intensive project is called D-Town Farm, which is a 7-acre farm in a city-owned park in Detroit. And at this point, it's the largest farm in the city of Detroit, but I always caution people that larger is not necessarily better, bigger is not necessarily better, because most of you probably know that there are very large-scale corporate interests that are proposing doing farming or growing of various sorts in the city of Detroit. The largest of which thus far is the Hans Project, which we had a very big battle around in December of last year around the proposal to sell about 1,900 city-owned lots to John Hans for the stated purpose of growing trees. And so we had significant problems with that proposal because we think that it continues a paradigm of amassing large tracts of land in the hands of wealthy white men. And that, we think, is one of the root causes of food security throughout the world. In fact, I would say that as we look at how we really create land, how we create food justice, we have to look more and more at the question of land, because it really rests at the center of this. Dispossessing people of their land and the ability to produce food from the land and to extract resources from the land and to build community on the land is really, again, one of the root causes of food insecurity and other forms of exploitation. And so if we're really concerned about justice, we have to look critically at that question. It's really a hard nut to crack because, you know, how do you this far into the game, how do you kind of rethink how land is distributed in the United States? But the reality is that the land that we're living on was basically gangstered from the Native Americans. And although, you know, we still have some reminder of that in names such as Washtenaw, the name of this community college, or Michigami or Michigan, the name of this state, for the most part, the native peoples of this continent have been dispossessed of their land and rendered food insecure as a result. And the same is true with African Americans in this country, in the southern part of this country, who after the horrors of chattel slavery were able to accumulate land either by purchasing the land or, in some cases, benevolent former owners who gave land to newly freed, formerly enslaved Africans. And so by 1910, millions of acres have been accumulated by African Americans, but there's only a small percentage of that at this point that we still own. And many times we lost land but by terror campaigns. And I can say in my own family, my great-grandfather, who was born into slavery in Mississippi just a few years before formal chattel slavery ended, was able to, by 1887, be elected to the state legislature in Arkansas and also have land that he owned and farmed in Marion, Arkansas, about 40 miles west of Memphis. So in 1887, the good white people of Marion, Arkansas, had enough of these uppity Negroes who had really taken most of the elected positions and many of the judgeships in Marion, Arkansas, as was the case in many communities. African Americans kind of stepped up. Yeah, and this is really amazing, this story, 10, 20 years out of slavery, to really be able to control communities and create vibrant economies and build institutions is miraculous. But the good white people of Marion, Arkansas had enough of that, and so they rounded up my great-grandfather and all of the other black leadership of that town and ran them out of town at gunpoint. And so he resurfaced some years later in Brinkley, Arkansas, where he reestablished his life. But I often think about how my life might have been different had he been able to maintain ownership of that land and pass that land down intergenerationally. And so now somebody else so-called owns that land. And so we have this historical inequity that continues based on this idea of land ownership. I would even assert that the idea of individual ownership of land is largely a European construct. And it's also part of this kind of Eurocentric view of the world, because in many parts of the world, in Africa, among the native peoples of the Western Hemisphere, typically land was seen as being for the collective good. And that while you might have use of it, you didn't have ownership of it. In fact, it really even baffles me, the idea that human beings could conceptualize that you can own a piece of the earth, or that you can own a river, or, how do you get the right to own a river or own a lake? How do you, again, it baffles me. I'm not sure how that happens, but we need to look more at this question of land ownership, so-called, and land use as we're trying to create food security and food justice. So D-Town Farm is currently the largest of the many farms in the city of Detroit, and we grow about 37 different crops that we sell at farmers markets. We sell to some stores in the city of Detroit, and we sell to some restaurants. We also sell at the farm on Saturdays and Sundays. We also do, we have an apiary. We raise bees for both honey and for pollination of the crops. We are producing mushrooms, and really we're still kind of in the learning stages with the mushrooms. We are producing some, but they're not robust enough to take to the market on a consistent basis. We do lots and lots of composting at our farm, and we started out doing small-scale composting, but we're now doing very large-scale composting where we're producing thousands of yards of compost annually. We have an agreement with Forgotten Harvest, which is the area's largest food rescue mission, and they'll go around to grocery stores and pick up food which is outdated. The food that can still be consumed by humans is donated to food banks, and the food that can't be consumed is brought to D-Town Farm. So each week we get thousands of pounds of food waste delivered to our farm by Forgotten Harvest, and this is really a step up because prior to that we had to do what's called dumpster diving. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's a nasty job. So we'd have to go to Eastern Market with the pickup truck and with garbage cans and scoop out the food waste and then bring it back to the farm. So now we have a truck that pulls up twice a week, and each trip has about 15 pallets of food waste that they drop off. And so we use that as our nitrogen source, and we combine that with wood chips that we get regularly from the Wayne County Forestry Department, which are also delivered to us. And we produce this rich compost, which is our means of fertilizing our farm. In the lower left-hand corner, you see some of our collard greens, which probably are our most prolific crop and the crop we're best known for. And I don't know if this is true, but I've heard many people say that the collard greens from D-Town Farm are sweeter than any of the greens in the city of Detroit. In the upper right-hand corner, you see Bambi. And when we first moved to our current location, the first year we planted about 750 tomato plants and harvested less than 5 pounds of tomatoes because of Bambi and her family. There's about 700 deer that follow the course of the Rouge River, and they had a very hearty diet that year. So thanks to a friend of ours, Mike Hamm at Michigan State University, he had some money for urban ag in Detroit. He liked the work we were doing. He donated the money to put up a deer fence, so we've eliminated that problem. But we're now developing expertise at how to get more of our crop than the groundhogs get. And so I don't know how many of you had that problem. And really, this is another aspect that Oran is one of my teachers, and we were in a session, I think in Traverse City a couple of years ago, and I mentioned this problem, and he came to me, he gave me, a technique for trying to eliminate the groundhogs being able to get into our growing beds. And so we've been using that, and it's working very well. And it involves fencing vertically, as we normally do, but groundhogs tunnel under. And so typically what people say is you do a trench, maybe 18 inches, 24 inches down, and you put wire down so they can't. But that's like really labor intensive. And that works well if you got a little 10 by 12 garden in your backyard. But when you're talking about 7 acres, that's a lot of work. And so he suggested to us that we just lay the fencing on the ground and attach it to the vertical fence. And so we've been doing that, covering it with wood chips, and I'm proud to report that it's very effective. So thank you so much. So many of you didn't know that Oran Hesterman was also an animal control expert. So we're also developing expertise at trapping animals. And while, as a vegan particularly, I'm very concerned about making sure that we treat animals justly, I've also come to the conclusion that if we're going to have an abundant crop, that we have to have methods in place to control the animal population at the farm and to reduce their access to the crops that we're growing. In the lower left-hand corner there is kale, which has become my favorite vegetable. I didn't taste kale until I was a grown man. So I'll move more quickly to give me the 5-minute signal. So the largest part of our work, though, is really reframing among African Americans the honorable work of agriculture. And I'll just tell you a very short story. I had the chance to travel to Mali, West Africa, about 10 years ago, prior to all of the turmoil that's going on there now. And we were traveling in a small group in a van. There were about 7 of us, which is really how I prefer to travel. I don't like being on big buses, leaving the country, going with large groups of people, because you really get to see what the term ugly American means when you travel with large groups of people, because some people can be a little bit whack. I can remember being in Ghana one time, no, in Senegal, I'm sorry, and some children were coming up trying to sell us things, and there was a woman on the bus from Detroit, and she said, they can't even speak English. So I don't really like affiliating myself with that kind of energy when I'm traveling abroad. But anyway, so we were in this small group in Mali, and one of the things that you can do when you're traveling in a small group, you see something that looks interesting, you can stop. And so we saw an elder sitting on the side of the road. We were going actually from Bamako, the capital city, up into the Bandiagara Mountains where the Dogon people live. And so on the way there, we saw this elder sitting in front of a mud structure that he lived in. And we said, well, let's stop and talk to him. And so one of the guys with us was from Senegal, so he spoke French, which they also speak in Mali, so he's able to translate. So after talking to the elder for a while, he told us, before you leave, you have to go across the road and greet the farmer. And he said the reason you have to greet the farmer is because it's those who work in the sun who make it possible for those who work in the shade. And so that really resonated with me, and it really showed in that statement an understanding that the whole society is really dependent upon farmers, and that because of that, farming is an honorable work. And so part of what we have to do within this food movement is restore the honor to farming. It has to be seen as an honorable profession. You know, right now, very few adults, very few parents say to their child, oh, Johnny, when you grow up, I really want you to be a farmer, right? I mean, you don't hear that too often. You might hear, you know, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a teacher, but not too many people are encouraging their children to be farmers. And that's not only because it's not seen as being honorable work, but also because there's some real economic challenges in farming in this society now, and in fact, in many parts of the world, given the competition of small-scale farmers with the industrial agricultural system. So that's the problem we have among people in general, that farming is not seen as honorable work. But the problem is even more intense in African-American communities, as I mentioned earlier, because of our experiences with slavery, sharecropping, and other forms of tenant farming. So part of our work is to reframe this work so that we can encourage more African-Americans to get involved in it. I mentioned also one of our purposes was policy work, and I'm going to go through this very quickly and just say that we wrote a food security policy for the city that we got unanimously passed by the City Council in 2008, which was almost miraculous in 2008 given the acrimony that existed on the Detroit City Council. We had significant input from my dear sister Kami Patakuchi and many others. If you want to see a copy of that policy, you can go to the Detroit Food Policy Council's website and download the entire policy. If you go to www.detroitfoodpolicycouncil.net. The Food Policy Council has 21 members that represent various sectors of the food system, including 6 people who represent the grassroots community, because we want to make sure that this Food Policy Council is not co-opted, as some have been, by Big Ag. You know, this is in a sense kind of a battle that we're involved in. You know, while we have many people who are building for sustainable agriculture, we have other folks who are pushing back and who kind of want to keep the same structures in place. And so we have to make sure that these food policy councils that we're building are not co-opted by Big Ag. So the Detroit Food Policy Council implements and monitors the food security policy for the city of Detroit. We do an annual food system report, which I brought some copies of today, about 50 copies that are on the front table, and I have a few with me here. This is the latest one that just came out about a month ago. This particular report covers the years 2011 through 2012, and it deals with 2 areas, school food and urban agriculture. I would really encourage you to pick up a copy of that before you leave today. And that's also online if you don't want to get the hard copy today by going to the Detroit Food Policy Council's website. We do a weekly column in the Michigan Citizen newspaper called Food is Life, and we hold an annual summit called the Powering Up the Local Food System Summit, which will take place in April of this year. We also have 4 work groups that are the vehicles through which community members can engage in the work of the Detroit Food Policy Council. I also mentioned this effort, Uprooting Racism, Planting Justice. We, since 2009, have been engaging in monthly conversations about how race impacts the food system and how we might mitigate some of those negative impacts. So when we started our organization in 2006, we adopted the name Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, but as we've grown in our consciousness, we've really grown to understand that really what we're promoting is food sovereignty. And so I would encourage you to study the principles of food sovereignty as put forth by Via Campesina. And the number one principle of food sovereignty is that food is a basic human right. Regardless of your position in life, regardless of your economic standing, you have the right as the result of being a human being on this earth to have access to adequate amounts of healthy, affordable, nutritious food. The same is true for water, and the second principle of food sovereignty has to do with land reform. I already spoke on that earlier, so I won't go back into it, but I'll just say that Via Campesina, as many people throughout the world understand that this issue of who has access to the land is fundamental to the issues of food security and food justice. So embedded within this idea of food sovereignty are the concepts of food security, food justice, and environmental stewardship. We're concerned, as I mentioned earlier, about the economics of food, that the places we buy food circulate money within our communities, and we're also concerned that people are treated justly by the food system by which they purchase their food. I also want to add that we're also very concerned about workers within the food system, and just again encourage you to really spend some time talking to Saru today, who has a new book out, which also I would endorse and encourage you to purchase. I'm sure she's got it with her today. I hope she has it with her today. But it's very important that the workers within the food system are treated justly. So the food justice and food security movement really provides a lens through which we can struggle for social justice on a larger level. And food, in a sense, is kind of a great equalizer, and it cuts across all of the kind of ways that human beings tend to divide ourselves up. So in order to really make this movement deeper and broader, we have to study the root causes of poverty, hunger, and oppression. And I always like to end with the words of one of my favorite hip-hop groups, Dead Prez, "Let's Get Free." Thank you.
We have a little bit of time for questions from the audience. There's a couple of people around that have microphones, and if you can raise your hand, they'll be coming to you. There's one in the back. So right on the front row, and then we'll go over here to the back to Nikki. So first here, yes. Turn it on.
One thing that I've always wondered about in terms of the soil in the Detroit area is whether you find that there's contamination and lead or anything like that that might be hazardous to the population.
Clearly in an industrial city, or a former industrial city like Detroit, there's a great deal of pollution by heavy metals. But what we found is that the perception of the problem is actually larger than the problem itself. The Garden Resource Program does soil testing for most of the gardeners and farmers in the city of Detroit, and they find that only about 13% of the samples that they test come back as being polluted with heavy metals. Nonetheless, we would highly recommend that no one plant anything in Detroit prior to having the soil tested.
Hello. Why do you think the major food chains left Detroit? There are still almost 1 million people there.
I think it has a lot to do with race. I think it has a lot to do with the shift of population density from the city of Detroit to the mostly white suburbs surrounding Detroit, and also not just the shift in population density, but the shift in wealth that occurred also. And so I think they feel like they can make more money in the ring of suburbs surrounding Detroit than they can in Detroit itself. I think that's the primary reason, but we at some point need to have a forum and have some of those supermarket owners and CEOs, on the stage, and we need to be asking them those questions too. And it's not just Detroit, it's other urban areas and also some rural areas that they choose not to locate in.
Thank you for your words. One thing that you spoke about was...
Can I get whoever's speaking to stand up, because it's kind of weird listening to the question. I can't tell who's talking.
You spoke to white people needing to divest, like a superiority complex, but I think it's a similar argument for wealthy African Americans who also go into impoverished or underprivileged African American communities, and just speak to the process of divesting, the kind of, I'm a privileged person going to help underprivileged people. Like, what's that process like? Or how do you idealize divesting?
Okay, thank you for your question, first of all. One of the challenges with doing a short presentation is you have to kind of condense complex concepts into short sound bites. And so I really didn't fully expand on that idea. And so not only is race a factor, but clearly, as you're pointing out, class is a factor as well. And so sometimes in the movement, we would say people have to commit class suicide, just as white people need to engage in a process to divest themselves of the thinking associated with white privilege and with this system of white supremacy. People of various classes need to divest themselves of the privilege and the thinking that goes along with that privilege as they interact with communities. But my suggestion would be that regardless of one's racial or class standing, that people enter communities in a respectful way, and part of entering a community in a respectful way is not assuming that you have the ideas that are going to lead, but assuming that there's already a wealth of experiences and knowledge within that community, there's already assets, and that what you should do is come in and learn what those assets are, learn where that organic leadership is, and then find out how to be supportive of the people who are already in the community. So that would be my suggestion for all people who are engaging in this work. I also want to say, because I don't want white people to think I'm here to beat up on white people, that's not what I do, that this system of white supremacy impacts us all. So black people and other people of color are also impacted by the system of white supremacy. We're impacted in another way, but we're all impacted by it. And so none of us can be whole as long as this system that underdevelops people of color is in place. As long as white people think they're the best thing since sliced bread, then they're not looking at the rich cultural experiences of other people and learning from those experiences. For example, in schools, and I ran an African-centered school for about 21 years, up until 2011, but one of the things that we see in schools is that the dominant narrative in American schools is the narrative of people from Western Europe who came here and essentially conquered the native peoples and enslaved African peoples, and the history of everybody else is just a footnote in the margins to that main story, which is the story of the conquerors from Europe who came over. The history of Native Americans, the history of Asian Americans, the history of Latinos, Latinas, the history of African Americans is marginalized. And so what happens is that not only do those various ethnic groups not have the advantage of learning about themselves and having the kind of pride and sense of self that develops when you stand firmly within your own historical continuum, but it also deprives white people of the rich cultural knowledge that all of these other groups have. And so white supremacy is a scourge that we need to eliminate because it underdevelops everybody. And along with that, because we live in a capitalist system, we need to seriously look at how we eliminate these class divisions so that we can begin to create a system that uplifts all human beings.
Thank you. I saw 3 more hands, first right here, and then I think there was one back by the exit door. Is that right? Earlier on? No longer. All right, so then we're first going to come up here to the front, and then the last one will be over here kind of in the middle where Nikki is.
So, are there any...
Could we have, he went first. I'm just trying to watch hands, so we'll go to you right next.
First, thanks very much for your time today. At the beginning of your presentation, you talked a bit about some overarching characteristics of what you see as a fair food system. I'm curious, what do you see as some key milestones as we work towards that system? in the next, 2, 5, 10 years, that time frame?
I think one of the most important milestones, and this is something I'm finding is being discussed nationally, is reshaping this movement so that we have people of color in the leadership of the movement. Still largely the good food movement, or the good food revolution, as Will Allen calls it, is personed by young white people, often young white women. And so, and again, that's not to criticize them, because I think their intentions are golden, but the people who are most impacted by food security need to be in the leadership of the movement. And so seeing a shift in the leadership, and then also part of the reason this national discussion is taking place about reshaping the movement, it has to do with the decline of the Community Food Security Coalition, which was one of the leading organizations within the food movement. So it closed its doors a few months ago, and it's kind of created this void that many people are trying to rush in and figure out how to fill. And so as we're redefining this movement, making sure that we really have racial justice within the movement, and it's not primarily a white middle-class movement, but it really, brings to the table and brings to the forefront people of color who are most impacted by food insecurity, I would say would be one of the biggest milestones for success within the movement. But some of the other milestones would be, we often talk about in Detroit and in Michigan, producing 10% of the food that we consume locally would be a milestone. There's milestones in environmental milestones. There's milestones in terms of workers within the food system. There's a very excellent report I want to refer people to called The Color of Food, published by the Applied Research Center, that shows that throughout the food system that white people tend to have higher paying jobs and tend to be in management positions more than people of color. So seeing a shift in that would be another milestone. There's many milestones that we can look for that would point that we're moving in the right direction towards creating a just food system.
2 more questions. First up in front.
So are there any tangible and viable concrete efforts to stop people like this Hans guy from acquiring too much land and power in Detroit?
Yes, as I mentioned, we had a very intense struggle that really culminated in December. It had been going on for some years. And let me say this also, that I'm not here to demonize John Hance, the human being. I want to make that clear, because part of what I saw happening within this struggle was people trying to paint horns on him, and and that's really not the case. I had the chance to have breakfast with him one day, and ask him questions directly, and we have different philosophies, we have different views about how the world should proceed, but that doesn't make him an evil person. And so I want to say that from the outset, because I saw a lot of that among some of my comrades, which kind of disturbed me. And I think that we always have to take the moral high ground. And what we have to oppose is the principles that people are moving against, and not oppose the people, the human beings themselves. So there was a very intense struggle, again, which culminated in December. And many of us, we created an alliance of several organizations that is now called the Community Trust Alliance. And we did lots and lots of door-to-door organizing in that neighborhood where the proposed purchase was to take place. And we were able to pressure the city council into having a public hearing where we got more than 400 people from that neighborhood to turn out, the vast majority of whom expressed their displeasure at the proposed sale. But in spite of that, the very next day after the public hearing, the city council voted 5-4 to sell this land to Hance Farms. Now, we're not stopping, because we think that the Hance case, in a sense, is a barometer for what's to come, and that there will be many others. In fact, there's others now who have proposals to buy large tracts of land. They sold this land to him, by the way, at 8 cents per square foot, or about $300 per lot. And so the price was inequitable, because we have others in that same footprint, that same geographic footprint, who have attempted to purchase lots, who have been given a purchase price much higher by the city of Detroit. So in a sense, he was given, we feel, a red carpet, and we think it's just a very dangerous precedent. So we're continuing to meet this Community Trust Alliance, and we're putting forth the proposal, we're putting forth the concept of community land trust as one way to hold land by communities and have those communities decide how that land is used. And so there are a few neighborhoods in the city of Detroit that are looking at this idea of community land trust, and some that are actually moving on it now. And so we expect that to be a more prominent in the discussion about how land will be used in the city of Detroit. So we're continuing that struggle, and I would invite you just to kind of keep your ears tuned to some of the things that will happen in the next few months. One of the things we were able to get one of the city council persons who voted for the hand sale to commit to work with us to bring about this idea of a community land trust. So her name is Santil Jenkins, and we plan to hold her accountable to that since she made that commitment. She made it kind of in the heat of the battle. I was pressuring her, and she, I guess as a concession, said, well, I'll support that too. So, what I tend to do when somebody tells me they're going to do something, I hold them accountable to it. And I publicize other people, publicize that to other people so they know she said it, so we can collectively attempt to hold her accountable to that.
Our last question, please.
I just wanted to ask you, Malik, about what advice you might offer those of us in the room with our own individual organizations, spheres of influence, with inviting as many voices to the table to discuss what the word fair means. That when we're creating change, the more that we can have as much input. What advice have you gathered from your own experience or seen other leaders in the field doing to increase access across getting as many voices into the room to define that together?
Can I ask you what your name is?
I'm Robbie Griswold.
I thought so. How are you? Your voice sounded familiar.
How are you?
Fine. I'm looking forward to working with you in the next few weeks. We're going to be doing something in Ann Arbor, and perhaps you can share details later about that. But let me say that we have to be very careful, because when we use this term, and I hear this used a lot, inviting people to the table, there's a power relationship that is implied within that, because it suggests that somebody already owns the table, and that we're going to invite you to come sit at our table. And many of us are not very interested in that. In fact, some of us are more interested in building our own table, or maybe knocking the legs out of the table that's there right now, and maybe we can all work together to build a table together or something like that. But so I'm just careful about that kind of language. But what I've seen in many communities is that, well, first of all, if you want to get those who are most impacted by food insecurity, you can't do it using the traditional means. Just posting it on Facebook is not enough, right? Or sending out text blast is not enough. You actually have to, this has been my experience. In Detroit, getting black folks, just regular black folks, not foodies, you have to go, to them, look them in the eye, develop a rapport and a relationship with them over a period of time, and then people might be willing to sit down and really engage in how we collectively reshape things. So it's not a quick fix solution. It requires really long-term relationship building, which has to be built on the basis of mutual respect and built on the basis of understanding that communities already have assets and figuring out where are those assets and where's the leadership that already exists, what do they want, and really then engaging with folks. But also, kind of digging deep and being in the community and finding out, where are the voices? And I think one of the things, when Oran heard me at the Detroit Athletic Club, I'm not inside of his head, but I suppose, he said, well, maybe this guy is a valuable voice and more people need to hear him. So, he's invited me, and then other people So, I think that's important. We need to find out who. And it might be somebody in a church who's never been on TV and has never written a book and never been in a magazine, but they have this valuable perspective. And so we need to find those valuable perspectives and really lift them up and help, encourage the leadership of those voices. But also I would encourage, as a way of creating a more diverse movement, that we all engage in anti-racist training. It's not just enough to say that, I understand that, there's racism that exists in America. And I've studied race for a long time. 40 years. But until I went through an anti-racism training and really had some of the frames to view this and the language to look at it, I didn't have as in-depth an understanding as I think I do now. I'm still growing in my understanding. But I really want to encourage that, because it removes some blinders and it helps you to deal with communities in a more equitable way. So there's lots of groups that do that anti-racist training. There's one in Michigan called Crossroads in Kalamazoo. There's one in New Orleans that we've used, the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And my personal favorite is one called DR Works, Dismantling Racism Works. And so going through anti-racism training, whether you're a so-called white person or so-called person of color, is important, and it helps, again, remove some of these kind of blinders that we wear, and helps us to see how we might approach communities in a way which is more respectful. I just want to end by saying that one of the things we have to do as we're ramping up this movement is we have to lead with values. And I mentioned earlier about not personally attacking people, you know, because we disagree with their viewpoints doesn't mean that we have to diminish their humanity. We want to take the moral high road. And so we have to lead with values. And the foremost of those values that we have to lead with, and the value that our organization holds as our number one value, is love. Is love, is love. I just want to put that out there, that above and beyond everything else that we do, that love has to be at the core of the work that we're doing, and both a love for ourselves, a love for each other, a love for humanity, a love for the animals and plants that we share this planet with. And if we hold that in the forefront, I'm confident that we can reshape the food system and reshape society in a way that is beneficial to all of us. So I thank you for your patience today, and hopefully there was something of value that I said. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Malik. This has been an incredible honor to have you here, and I think you've set an incredible platform for us to continue conversations throughout today. We're a little behind, but I think it's been worth it. We're still going to take a very small break, but just 5 minutes, please, rather than the 15 minutes we were going to allow. And then come back and be prepared to continue the conversation. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. We're going to get started in 1 minute. Please take your seats.
Hi, how are you? Flores.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, we're controlling it up there, so I'm not sure what he needs to do. Okay.
Yeah, they just have to leave down.
Me? Yeah.
Al is the Michigan Department of Civil Rights part of state government?
Yes, sir.
Hi, everyone.
I'm going to talk a little bit about it.
Thanks for coming back. We're going to go ahead and start the panel session. My name is Lesli Hoey. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm also part of the planning crew. I was involved as much as I could. It was pretty remarkable to see this unfold from the background. I'd like to introduce our panel members this morning. Oran Hesterman, I don't need to introduce. He's president of the Fair Food Network. We heard from him earlier. Al Flores serves as the Community Relations Division Director for the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, where he's designed and developed several special project initiatives, including the Multicultural Liaisons Initiative, which is meant to enhance the department's service delivery and communication to communities and specific cultural groups, including African American, American Indian, Arab American, Asian American, and Latino American groups, and the disability population. Al has worked for more than 30 years in the social services and civil rights arena. He's the son of migrant and seasonal farm worker parents, and he also worked as a farm worker until his senior year in high school. He's a graduate of Saginaw Valley State University and has completed graduate work at the University of Michigan in public administration. And we're lucky he got here today. He started his commute today at 6 in the morning. So thanks for making it. Saru, Jayaraman, and Lena, her daughter, you may have heard her here and there. We welcome them as well. She is director of the Food Labor Research Center at the University of California, Berkeley, and co-founder and co-director of the Restaurant Opportunities Centers United, ROC United. After 9/11, together with Displaced World Trade Workers, she co-founded ROC in New York, which has organized restaurant workers to win workplace justice campaigns, conduct research and policy work, partner with responsible restaurants, and launch cooperatively owned restaurants. ROC now has 10,000 members in 19 cities nationwide, including one in Detroit, and also a statewide affiliated organization that has over 1,000 restaurant workers across Michigan that are affiliated. Saru is a graduate of Yale Law School and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and she's been profiled in the New York Times Public Lives section in 2005, was named one of Crane's 40 Under 40 in 2008, 1010 wins Newsmaker of the Year, and one of the New York Magazine's influentials of New York City. And as Malik mentioned, she's author of Behind the Kitchen Door, and she's going to have her books out during lunch to do book signing. One thing we also wanted to do is show a video that kind of illustrates her work. I think that video is also a great introduction generally to this panel, just to help us talk about some of the hidden dimensions of our food systems that still aren't fair. How we're gonna run this panel is I'm gonna have some questions that I'd like all of them to respond to, and the first question is one where most of them will be speaking longest. And then afterwards we'll have some time as well for your questions and answers. And then we'll be ending a little bit later than planned, but around 11:35 or so. The first question that we wanted to pose to all of you is to think about, in the context of your work and your experience, how do you envision a fair food system?
Good morning. My name is Alberto Flores. I work with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. We investigate unlawful discrimination cases and do a whole bunch of other things. What I like to do, first of all, is acknowledge my fellow Cardinal down there. And the other thing is go blue. Huh? I thought I'd hear something. I really want to thank everybody, the organization, for this invite. Anytime I get to share information regarding migrant seasonal farm workers, I love it, and I go to do that. So thank you very much, and I feel really privileged to be on a panel with such distinguished people. I mean, you've seen the video, folks. And following the keynote, that's hard for me. Somebody once said, you never, speak after the president or before lunch. So, or something like that. I'm going to read a quote to you real quick, folks, and I promise you my little presentation here is not going to be all reading. The seasonal labor system is fraught with problems for the migrant, the farmer, and the local citizen. Farmers who, because of the low prices received for their products, are reluctant to give the workers a high rate of pay. Housing, which may be used only a few months out of the year, is an expense to the farmers, though often the only kind of home a migrant has. Many of the problems associated with the seasonal labor force are inherent in the migrant movement of people and in the seasonal nature of agricultural employment. Every word of that quote, folks, holds true today. I have to start with that. But this quote is from a report on migrant labor in Michigan prepared for the House and Senate Labor and Agricultural Committees in September of 1965. It's been 48 years to now. There has not been another report done since 2010 that the Michigan Civil Rights Commission commissioned and allowed the staff, and I was one of the staff that worked on it. And I'm going to go through that in a little bit, but let me just say that to give you a picture of the migrant seasonal farm workers in Michigan, a lot of people don't know that they even exist or that they come here and do work and such. But they're the people that are they're the first to handle our food before it gets to our tables. There's a lot of in between, of course, and to the restaurants and such, but they're the first ones, and a lot of people don't acknowledge them, don't know that they're there, probably don't care. So, definition of a migrant farm worker: they're transient. They might travel from the Texas, the Florida, Arizona, and such to Michigan. We're one of the host states. There's, of course, others. There are migrant workers within Michigan also that travel around. That constitutes a migrant farm worker. The seasonal farm worker are the ones that live here around. They've settled out of the migrant stream. They do farm work in the summer. In the winters, they do odd jobs or whatever they can get, okay? Just so we're on the same page here. The Michigan Department of Civil Rights, through myself, I wrote a proposal through HUD, and we got some money to do an enumeration in Michigan. There had really never been anything done in terms of who's out there, how many, and such. It turned out that we still have, as of 2020, 2007, we still had 92,000 people coming to Michigan, and those that are here doing farm work, okay? So that'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. That's not counting the people that are hired on farms to do work, driving tractors and such, okay? The other thing is that, or estimate, is that probably 98% of migrant seasonal farm workers are of Latino descent. A lot of them are from Mexico. Now that we're having more from Central America, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and so on, and other countries of Central America. Matter of fact, there are so many people settling out in the Grand Rapids area because the agricultural industry is in the western part of the state here in Michigan. In the high schools, people that settle out, the kids are calling themselves 1 fence, 2 fence, 3 fence. The 1 fence is a Mexicano, the 2 fence is a Guatemalan, 3 fence is Nicaraguan, and so on and so on. Kiddingly, of course, but that's how it's getting to be. In envisioning a fair food system, that's part of the question here, or the first question. The Michigan Department of Civil Rights basically sees this as, first of all, we have to educate people in terms of what a migrant seasonal farm worker is or isn't. From there, we have to work on the insurmountable issues that confront the migrant seasonal farm workers in the state of Michigan. Our department's motto through a branding that we did is only fair is fair, okay? A lot of people in the state of Michigan and beyond see that, well, it's fair, but only to the people that we think should be here or not. A lot of the people have in their minds that, well, these people look different, dress different, they're going to be gone in a while, they're probably not even documented. Just, you know, the xenophobia thing kicks in, and they just shouldn't be here. So why should we even allow health care, emergency rooms, services, schooling for the kids, and so on and so on? Now, I do have to say, as an estimate, in Michigan, they claim that 50% of the migrant and seasonal farm workers are undocumented, okay? That's a lot. Again, you're talking the Nicaraguas, the Guatemalans, Mexicanos, and such. This is a good start, by the way, in terms of your organization to have somebody like myself here. I see a lot of students here, and you can do a lot, folks, as a student, as anybody, as an adult like myself, to try to change things, but we have to learn about that first. There's literature out there that we can read and so on. Not a lot. It's more or less treated as a new phenomenon, but migrant seasonal farm workers, we've been here since before the 1900s. Somebody's been doing the really, really hard work in the fields that nobody else will do. And that's been tested before. High school kids, college kids in the summers, anybody, it's very hard being under the sun, not having restrooms in the fields, and just on and on. So it's been proven that the growers will even take chances of hiring undocumented in order to get somebody to pick the crops so that they don't rot in the fields and they go bankrupt. Myself, I was a migrant seasonal farm worker, worked till my high school year, and then I went to college. Thank God. The only reason I went, folks, because I could wrestle a little bit. I got a scholarship, and I went. And that's what got me out of the migrant stream, thank God. But jobs that I've had, even working with Latino ex-offenders through a Pinto Project program out of Saginaw, Michigan, I was able to incorporate somehow working with farm workers, make the time, write proposals and that sort of thing for them and so on. Now, and I've had other jobs that don't even deal with farm workers, but I've somehow been able to talk the supervisors or the people in charge to let me work with them somehow. And I've done that with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I mean, we have issues, folks, on our plate that are insurmountable. I mean, the one right now that we're dealing with is the mascot logo issue. Hopefully we can get through that okay. But there's a lot of racism. There's still, the hate crimes have gone up after President Obama was elected. Hate groups multiplied in the state of Michigan and beyond. And hate crimes did also. But with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, I became the Latino liaison along with my co-workers, you know, the African American liaison, American Indian, Arab, Asian, and myself. So what I did was start working with Latino groups and so on, but also looking at the farm worker issues. There was a director that we had, Mr. Scott, Calvin Scott. He allowed me to, well, they changed their commission meeting from Benton Harbor to Kalamazoo and changed the theme to migrant seasonal farm workers. Advocates came to talk to us about all the issues and problems and so on, people that work with legal aid and provided services and such. One commissioner got up at that Kalamazoo, we were at Western Michigan University. One commissioner got up, his name's Mark Bernstein. You might have heard of him, he's from this area. Now he's a trustee, by the way, for U of M. But he said, you know, I heard from you all, and there are a lot of problems, but I want to hear from the migrants. I want to hear from them, so do something about that. So he was a commissioner, right away we got on it. We went to about 8 or 9 sites in the state of Michigan where the farm workers were. We toured the camps, we then took them to a place where we fed them at night, and we got testimony from them, audio, visual, written, whatever we could, in different languages and such. And I say different languages because it's not just Spanish. The people that are coming from Mexico and the other countries are speaking their indigenous, I'm sorry, I can't even see that, okay. Okay, languages, so you know, it was just difficult to collect the information. Now, what we did was we did a report, which is in our website, which is www.michigan.gov/MDCR. You can get it from me later if you wish. That report is in there. There's an executive summary. There's a photo report in there and so on. Things that came out of that were just from housing, dealing with crew leaders, stags bringing prostitutes into the camps, overcrowding, immigration issues, wage and hour, piece rate. I could go on and on, okay? The director that followed Mr. Scott, because he passed, Dr. Daniel Crickbaum, he got a group together of a higher level, a cabinet group, he calls it, and we're working on the 15 recommendations that to follow up on the report so that we can better the lives of migrant seasonal farm workers in Michigan. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much to the conference organizers for having me, having Roth. We're very happy to be here. And thanks for accommodating baby noises. Hopefully she'll do okay during this panel. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. You know, you got to see the video, and the video was actually created by a member of ours, a restaurant worker, who's an amazing videographer, and it's gotten now over 114,000 views on YouTube. It's gone viral. It's gotten a lot of attention. And I would have to say, even me, I didn't know any of the things, the issues that are in that. All of those are true stories that are covered in my book, Behind the Kitchen Door. Even I didn't know what was happening behind the kitchen door, even though I was a labor organizer and an attorney for many years working with low-wage workers until 9/11. 9/11 really changed my life and my dining experience, as I'm sure it did for many of you. In my case in particular, on September 11th, there was a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center, Tower 1, called Windows on the World. On that morning of 9/11, 73 workers died in the restaurant, and about 250 workers lost their jobs. And there was a small union inside that restaurant because less than 0.01% of all restaurant workers in the United States are unionized. They didn't have the capacity to support the workers who had lost their jobs or the families of the victims. And so they called me and one of the head waiters from Windows, Fakak Mamdou, an immigrant from Morocco. And together we founded ROC. In the aftermath of the tragedy, it was really just helping people get back on their feet. But we were pretty much very quickly overwhelmed by calls for help from all over New York City and then all over the country from restaurant workers. And we did a little research to find out why we were being so overwhelmed and found that the restaurant industry right now is the nation's largest and fastest growing sector of the economy. It's over 10 million workers in the United States that work in restaurants. 1 in 10 American workers works in restaurants. And the restaurant industry is one of the only sectors of the economy to grow over the last couple of years of crisis. There are actually, we're here talking about the food system. There are 20 million workers in the US food system, right? 1 in 6 American workers and 1 in 5 American private sector workers works in food, from farm work to meat and poultry processing, grocery stores, and restaurants. Over half of those 20 million workers are restaurant workers. 10 million, over 10 million are restaurant workers. But here's the sad part. The restaurant industry is not only the largest and fastest growing sector of the economy, it also happens to be the lowest paying employer in the United States. So 7 of the 11 lowest paying jobs in America, according to the Department of Labor, are restaurant jobs. And the 2 absolute lowest paying jobs in America, actually lower according to the Department of Labor than farm workers or any other kind of job, are restaurant jobs. Dishwashers and fast food preps and cooks are the lowest paid workers in America. So what does that mean? It means not only that the largest and fastest growing sector of our economy is proliferating the lowest paying jobs in America, it also means that the food system that we all care about, that we all want to make better, is actually the worst employer in the United States. It's not a bad employer, it's the worst employer. Every other sector of the economy does better than the food system in paying its workers and treating its workers well. And I'll tell you why. It's not an accident. It's not because that's the nature of the food system, that's the nature of restaurants. It's because of politics. It's because of something called the National Restaurant Association, something that we call the other NRA. The NRA, the Rifle Association, has gotten a lot of attention lately, right? Well, the other NRA is a group you haven't heard about that is equally as powerful and equally as deadly, frankly. It's the 10th most powerful lobbying group in Congress. It's the same group that got pizza declared a vegetable in Congress. And back in 1996, when Herman Cain was the head of the NRA, he struck a deal with Congress saying that they would not oppose the overall minimum wage continuing to rise as long as the minimum wage for tipped workers stayed frozen at $2.13 an hour. And so it has. For the last 22 years, it's been stuck at $2.13. And it's the reason why food servers suffer from 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the US workforce, and why food servers use food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the US workforce, which means that the people who put food on our tables cannot afford to put food on their own tables. I'm not even talking about access to good food. I'm talking about food. I'm talking about being able to feed your family and not be homeless. And I guarantee you, having worked in the restaurant, organizing the restaurant industry for the last 12 years, that there is somebody who is homeless or on the verge of homelessness on almost every restaurant, in almost every restaurant in America. Homelessness doesn't just look like living on the street. It means facing eviction or being insecure in where you're living, right? Also, not just low wages, but really poor health conditions face this industry. So 90% of restaurant workers don't have paid sick days, which means that 2/3 cook, prepare, and serve food while they're ill. With H1N1, which is a true story from my book, with pink eye, I can go on and on, but you haven't eaten lunch yet. Also, severe racial segregation and discrimination keeps workers of color, as you may have seen in the video, from advancing to the livable wage jobs in the industry. So in this context of not just an inequitable food system, not just an unjust food system, but the worst employer in America being the food system, we developed a tri-pronged model in the aftermath of the tragedy to surround the industry and build power for workers and counterbalance the force of the other NRA. So the 3 prongs of our work have included workplace justice campaigns, including litigation, worker organizing, community organizing. We've won 13 campaigns against large, high-profile restaurant companies, winning a total of $7 million in stolen tips and wages, and winning policy changes for thousands of workers across the country. One of our most recent victories was against a famous celebrity chef that some of you may have heard of named Mario Batali, who's very well known for promoting the concept of slow food, but unfortunately in his restaurants, not only was there tip stealing going on, but pretty severe racial discrimination, a very abusive chef at his premier restaurant in New York called Del Posto. We organized the workers. Over a year and a half, we filed litigation, we protested outside the restaurant, we helped to redefine what slow food really means, and in the end, not only did all of his workers get paid sick days, he got rid of the abusive chef, the workers received several $1 million in unpaid tips and wages, but he's joined us as a partner in promoting a different way of doing business in the industry. So that's the second prong of our work, is organizing and promoting a different way of doing business, what we call the high road to profitability. We've organized about 100 employers around the country that are doing the right thing, providing good wages and good working conditions. They include Zingerman's, who I know is providing food for lunch, a great employer. They include Tom Colicchio, star of Top Chef, a wonderful employer and great partner of ours. They include many other employers here in Detroit and around the country. And part of promoting the high road has been opening our own worker-owned restaurants, cooperative restaurants called Colors. So one was actually the restaurant where this video was filmed. That's not how we treat our workers at Colors. That was staged. But you got to see the beautiful restaurant, Colors, which is in New York, a worker-owned restaurant. And as many of you know, we've opened the second Colors here in Detroit, thanks to the good work of Minsu, who's here from Rock, Michigan. Feeding the baby. Located at 311 Grand Avenue. We really hope you stop by the restaurant and eat there. And it's spawning other cooperatives. We've got a co-op academy that's spawning other worker-owned cooperatives, food enterprises as part of the restaurant. We also train 1,000 low-wage workers a year around the country in livable wage job skills. And lastly, we've done a ton of research and policy work. We've had some victories. We raised the minimum wage for tipped workers in New York State from $3 to $5. We made it illegal in the city of Philadelphia to deduct credit card processing fees from workers' tips, which unfortunately is legal everywhere else, including here. But our holy grail, what we've really been fighting for the last several years now, has been to raise at the federal level that absurdly low tip minimum wage of $2.13. And we've had some success. A few years ago, we got Congresswoman Donna Edwards from Maryland to introduce the Wages Act, which for the first time in 2 decades would raise the tip minimum wage to 70% of the regular. And then last year, we got congressional leadership in the House and the Senate to introduce a comprehensive minimum wage bill called the Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2012 that would increase, that wholly subsumed our proposal to raise the tip minimum wage from $2.13 to at least $5 and then go up with inflation. And we had a big victory last week when President Obama mentioned it in the State of the Union. You may have heard him mention that raise the minimum wage. That's been the result of a lot of fighting for many years to make sure that restaurant workers are included and that we as a community can overcome the power of the NRA. But when they introduced that bill, congressional leadership said to us, George Miller said to us, to overcome the power of the NRA, we're going to have to see a groundswell of support, right? And we've thought a lot about that. How can we build a groundswell of support? How could we work with the food system and the food movement that is a groundswell, that's building a groundswell, right? Because in the last 12 years we've been organizing restaurant workers, we saw something happen in the middle of that. We've been trying to change the industry with regard to working conditions, but when Eric Schlosser's book Fast Food Nation came out and Michael Pollan's book Omnivore's Dilemma came out, a very organic, no pun intended, movement of people asking, is this locally sourced, is this organic, did result in restaurants around the country jumping over themselves to say, I source local, I provide organic produce. Whether it was true or not, they were saying that they were doing it, they were jumping on a trend, right? And so we think the same could be true if consumers engaged and asked employers every time they ate out about what the wages are and whether they provide paid sick days. We think the same could be true if we could educate people around the country around what's happening behind the kitchen door, which is why we wrote the book. And we got Eric Schlosser to write the foreword. It's the stories of restaurant workers and the data we've collected for the last 12 years on the industry. You know, stories of workers who struggled, who made it, who joined our movement for change, who've created change in their industry. Danny Glover's movie company has created a series of short film portraits based on the workers profiled in the book. We just heard they got selected into the Tribeca Film Festival, and they're making a full-length fiction feature film on the story of rock and the story of our, you know, growth and change in the industry. But most importantly, what we're trying to do with all of these things, the books and the films, educate consumers to stand by the workers and join our movement for change through a new eater organization we've created called the Welcome Table. And I hope maybe the folks might be able to show the website. It's www.thewelcometable.net. It's a new eater website and organization where we hope to collectivize the voices of people who eat out and eat in general so that we can have some online political power, sign petitions and online political power, maybe first to raise the minimum wage because it's long overdue, maybe then to win paid sick days, maybe later to fight NRA on pizza being declared a vegetable, maybe later to do something around GMO transparency. Who knows? The possibilities are endless, but we need political power. I would say we have admired the food movement for a long time. We are a part of it. One thing that it has lacked is political power, and maybe there's somebody who disagrees with me. I'd love to engage in a conversation about that. But it seems like we care a lot about changing the food system. We've done a lot of great things on the ground to do that. Urban farms, we've done a lot of great things. But the people who still hold the power in Congress continue to be the National Restaurant Association and Monsanto and Cargill and Tyson. And unless we collectivize our voices and demand that our Congress people listen to us and not to these huge moneyed corporations that dominate our food system, what we're doing on the ground cannot be counterbalanced by legislative change at the federal level. And the first legislative change we plead, that we ask, that we need, is a change to this ridiculously, absurdly low minimum wage. You know, when you earn $2.13 an hour, you take home a paycheck that says, this is not a paycheck, because your wages go entirely to taxes. You get a paycheck of zero, right? And in any other context, what is it called when you work for zero? It's called slavery. When you work for tips, your tips fluctuate, right? You're relying on somebody else, not your employer, to pay your wages. And this industry is getting away simply because of its political power with requiring all of us who eat out and eat to pay its workers' wages for them. No other industry gets that, right? But we're allowing the food system to get away with it because we haven't collectivized our voices, because we allow our legislators to listen to somebody else other than us, the people who vote for them, the people who pay taxes. Because corporations don't pay taxes, right? So we are building a movement, starting with the book. We are going to be signing books outside, but the book is more than a book. It is our call to action. It came out last week, and we did get a lot of buzz around it. We were on CNN last week with Soledad O'Brien. We're going to be on Bill Moyer's Journal this weekend, MSNBC next week, and then Democracy Now! The week of March 6th. We feel like we're building a buzz. It's getting there. You know, we can do it. If we sell 5,000 books, and we're very, very close by the end of this week, by tomorrow, we can actually get on the New York Times bestseller list. And lift these issues to the national stage and show our frenemies at the National Restaurant Association and in Congress that actually we have built a groundswell and we can change this for the good of restaurant workers and frankly for the good of all workers, the 20 million workers in the food system, and for the good of all of us who eat out and eat in general. Thank you.
So I'm going to be brief in my remarks and do it from sitting here. You already heard from me this morning, and I'm most interested in us responding to the questions that you have and getting a conversation going. But first of all, Saru, I want to congratulate you on the great strides that your leadership is making and your organization is making, and on the book. It's fabulous what you're doing.
Thanks.
And in addition to congratulating Saru, I need to really thank her as well. So when a couple of years ago I was writing Fair Food, Growing a Healthy, Sustainable Food System for All, I talked about one of the principles, I read about one of the principles on which we need to rest a new food system, and that's a principle of equity. And some of us call it fairness, some of us call it justice. In my more sort of academic perspective, I'm calling it equity. And while at Fair Food Network we're primarily concerned about equitable access to healthy, fresh, and sustainably grown food, I really have relied on Saru, starting several years ago, for me to learn more about the issue of equitable access to fair jobs and fair wages in the food system. And that has to be part of a principle of equity for the future, and the notion of equitable treatment of those who are doing the work, whether it's on the farm, in the processing plants, or in our food service arena, that you don't have a fair food system until and unless you have equitable treatment of workers. And then Malik was talking about it this morning, the notion of equitable access to resources. And some of that is land, equitable access to land for production. There are many places in the country. Michigan is not so much one of them, but you go out west and the whole issue of equitable access to water. Because if you don't have water in the West, you cannot grow food. You can't farm, you can't ranch. And so I've studied and written about equitable access to water. And then the whole notion of equitable access to capital. That's another very important resource for being able to create production, create ownership in the food system. So all of these aspects of what I call equitable access are part of a vision of a fair food system for the future. So just briefly, when I think about what is it going to take to create a fair food system, we can talk about different aspects of it: food workers, farm workers, access to resources, and a lot of us working on these individual aspects that needs to continue and needs to be supported much more than it is now. We were faced, a group of us in Detroit were faced not long ago with this question. We were together for a couple of days in Detroit. Many of the leaders of organizations in and around Detroit and Southeast Michigan working on food systems issues were faced with a question. It was actually Kellogg Foundation was asking us this question: what will it take to create a food system for the future of Detroit and Southeast Michigan that has equity as a primary characteristic of the system? What will it take? And it was interesting how most of us could focus on the individual aspects of what we're working on, but at the end of the start of that conversation, the answer was really, we're not sure. We're not sure what it's going to take to get there, from here to there. We can see a vision for what it looks like. We understand what current reality is, but it's not that easy to think about how we get from here to there. The one thing that we could agree on that I think is really important for us to consider is if we are going to have a food system in the future that's based on equity, especially equity of race and class in the system, it's important that we start building leadership that is more diverse across race and class for this whole movement. That if the leadership of the good food or fair food movement continues to rest primarily with those of us who are white and those of us who have the more financial means, it's difficult to see how we are going to progress very rapidly toward a system that encompasses equity. And so from that recognition, it was all of us recognizing it, whether it was white leadership like myself, black leadership like Malik or Dwayne Wells at the Gleaners Food Bank Council or others, all of us realize this is an issue we're all facing with our organizations. And so we've created now a working group of a number of us working on with organizations and leading organizations in Southeast Michigan to be asking ourselves the question, What do we need to do now to create a more racially, ethnically, and in terms of class, diverse pipeline of young people who can move into leadership of this movement as this movement continues to mature? And to me, that's one of the most promising aspects of thinking about what is it going to take for the future. And it's especially important. I want to say it here with, you heard Malik talk this morning about how he has learned to talk with primarily white audiences about issues that he's dealing with. I've learned that it's very important for me as a white male working in this movement, in this arena, for me to say to my white brothers and sisters how important it is for us as white people to be the ones who are out front talking about the importance of racial and ethnic diversity in the leadership of this movement for the long term, and to actually take steps towards doing that. And I think that's a very important area of conversation for all of us, especially those of us, a lot of us here in Washtenaw County in the Ann Arbor area, which is, as we know, a fabulous area for innovation and creativity and expansion in the local food movement. And it's also an area where most of the leadership is predominantly white. And we need to think about, in our community, how we address that for the future.
Thank you all. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the questions that I had, and I'm going to open it up to at least a couple of questions from the audience. And then I'll just let panelists decide if they all want to say something briefly related to the question, or just one of you. So again, we have some microphones. I see first hand in the back.
Hello. I was wondering, we've talked about increasing the political strength of the movement of, I guess we could say, marginalized workers or underpaid workers. And I was wondering if there's a movement of tying together those in the restaurant industry and those in the farms and fields. But I think there's a real kinship there, not just in the long hours and the underpay, but also sometimes it's the same people, whether it's, I work this job in the day and that job at night, or this job in the summer and that job in the winter, or culturally, my sphere of people I know work farm jobs or work restaurant jobs. I think there can be a lot of overlap and strength there.
Yeah, in 2008, when we went national, we created something called the Food Chain Workers Alliance, which is an alliance of worker organizations along the food chain. It includes farm worker organizations, meat and poultry processing worker organizations, food retail and distribution organizations, food distribution worker organizations, and restaurant worker. So we initiated it. It now has, I believe, 15 member organizations, including unions and worker centers. It includes, for example, the CIW, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which organizes farm workers in Immokalee, and Kata, which is a big farm worker organization in the Northeast. And together, we've done a lot. We put out a report called The Hands That Feed Us, which documents working conditions along the food chain. We've kind of we've done solidarity exchanges between workers. We have actually gone to tons of food conferences like this and helped to expand the definition of sustainability to include sustainable working conditions throughout the food chain. And most excitingly, we're working together on a campaign against one of the largest players in the National Restaurant Association, a company called Darden, that is actually the world's largest restaurant company, and you've never heard of it. They own Olive Garden, Red Lobster, Capitol Grill Steakhouse, Longhorn Steakhouse, and they actually are the leaders on the issue of keeping the minimum wage at $2.13 and not wanting to provide paid sick days or provide paid, allow paid sick days laws to pass. And here's the crazy thing: back in fall 2011, they announced a partnership. Olive Garden did with Michelle Obama around providing healthy food for kids at the Olive Garden. At the exact same time that that announcement went public, a restaurant worker at an Olive Garden, a server at an Olive Garden in Fayetteville, North Carolina, had to work with hepatitis A because she didn't have paid sick days. 3,000 people had to get tested for Hep A and filed a consumer class action against the restaurant and won. And that same year, 2 norovirus outbreaks came out in Olive Garden restaurants because workers didn't have paid sick days. So anyway, we've got a huge national campaign against this company to get it to pay more than $213 and to provide paid sick days. And as an alliance, we are organizing the suppliers of Darden as well. In fact, we're organizing, throughout the supply chain and getting this company to do the right thing with regard to its own employees and with regard to its supply chain. So we are doing exactly that. We are working together on a variety of things, put out information and expanding the definition and even organizing together to change the system. But I did just, at the beginning of your comment, you said we're talking about political strength of workers. Actually, I wasn't talking about political strength of workers. I hate to say this, but I think in some ways we have more political strength than the food movement writ large. What I was saying is that I think the broader food movement needs political power, right? We need political power, and we need to do it together, not just as workers, but as people who care about urban farming and local food systems and anything really with regard to food justice. We need political power, and so we would like to collectivize our voices so that we're not just. It's really important what we're doing at the local level. Please don't get me wrong. But it's also incredibly important that we collectivize our voices to make sure it's known that we have just as much voice and power as the NRAs and the Monsantans.
Yeah, unfortunately with the migrant seasonal farm workers, at least in Michigan, there are no organized unions or organizations that will be able to work on a statewide basis to connect to such organizations on the state or federal level, or national level and such, on issues like wage an hour and or piece rate. A lot of the farm workers in Michigan get paid piece rate, and if you don't feel, and including the little kids, by the way. Child labor is big with migrant seasonal farm workers throughout the nation, but particularly in Michigan. If you don't fill up the little cans of the blackberry or whatever you're picking, you may get less than $2 an hour, and there's no tips. I hate to say that, but it's a reality. On the national level, unions for farm workers, I can count them on one hand. United Farm Workers, Flock out of Toledo, and there's some others in Arizona, Florida, and such. So when I said earlier, we're starting from scratch in a sense, folks. The report was written, the second report, 48 years later, I wasn't kidding. And the people are still coming to Michigan and here working.
Do one more question, I'm sorry. I saw a hand down here.
I think I have the mic.
Sorry, where?
do I
Back
get
in
to do
the
my
back.
question?
How about you both ask your questions and we can see if we can combine the answers.
Okay. So it's going to be kind of a question wrapped in a comment, so do with it what you will. But I live and work in Detroit and do a lot of work with food and restaurants, very familiar with Rock and the work that Phil and Minsu are doing down there. And I remember when Phil was talking about the wages that they needed to pay their staff in order to be providing these equitable jobs. I've also worked in a lot of restaurants and with a lot of restaurant owners who know what a hard business it is. So while it's simultaneously the fastest growing industry, it's also an industry with one of the highest rates of failure. I think that's correct. But so I guess I'm wondering, because I also work with an organization that helps to develop small food businesses and food entrepreneurship using triple bottom lines, which actually Food Network is one of the funders of that project, so thank you very much. But when we're talking in terms of food businesses and being customers in establishments and supporting restaurateurs that are trying to provide fair wages, provide sustainable food, within your organizing efforts, whether it be with migrant labor, whether it be at Fair Food Network, with leaders within food organizations, I guess I'm wondering what kind of work is done to support the people who provide food in order that they can provide those wages. Because it seems to me that there's a lot of times the restaurants, is where we're asking them to make the changes, and it's different when it's maybe something like a Longhorn or an Olive Garden. But it seems like in a lot of different places in the industry that profit suck is happening at such a higher level that some of these smaller industry people, especially I'm sure people who are here in this room right now who own food businesses and know how tight the line is. And so I guess I'm just wondering what type of political organization or political capital you think is necessary to help those people make the decisions that they need to for the rights of their workers.
Thank you. And let's go ahead and take this last question and see if we can kind of combine.
I don't have a question so much as a plug in terms of adding your voice to the political discussion. There's a grassroots organization called Moms Rising that has petitions and easy click-the-button ways to advocate for minimum wage for all workers. It's momsrising.org. I'd be surprised if, at least Saru, you weren't already working with them.
So could we respond? Yeah. Can't see you very well, but so we have an association of high road employers that we call our Restaurant Industry Roundtable. We have one in Detroit that Vinci runs. And as I said, we have about 100 employers around the country that are part of this kind of alternative restaurant association. It's alternative voice to the National Restaurant Association. We created that round table to allow employers to speak to one another about how they could provide better wages and better working conditions, provide them each other with technical assistance and support, and actually we do it as well. We have national staff that constantly are providing support to these employers. So for example, I just had one of our oldest and longest friend employers, a restaurant in New York, call me and say, what do I do? An employee just sued me for tip stealing or wage stealing. And it was not intentional, I don't think it's true, but I need help. And so in that case, we actually helped her through the process of having been sued, mediated with the employee. And that's the kind of help that we can provide. We can train and provide technical assistance to employers about how other employers manage to have a triple bottom line, manage to pay good wages, and still actually have a really successful, thriving business, regardless of their size. We have employers in our roundtable that are very, very tiny, small mom and pop, restaurants, all the way to large mom and pop restaurants. One of them is in Detroit, profiled in my book, Russell Street Deli, which is a great employer, and the story of those two owners, Jason Ben, is in my book, as well as a small restaurant in Los Angeles that she's actually, the owner is a Vietnamese woman who's the chair of Slow Food LA, but believes that sustainability is not just about where her produce comes from, but also her working conditions. Both of those folks decided to work it into their business model so that from the beginning they said, we're very tiny, we're not Applebee's, we're not Olive Garden, but we're going to make a commitment to paying right and paying well and providing some benefits, and we're going to work it into our business model, and that's the way it is. And they've managed to do it, and they can be mentors to other up-and-coming restaurant owners or food entrepreneurs who do it right. But I will say that as an industry, it is a myth that there's really kind of shaky profit margins. As an industry, this industry makes 4 to 5% profit margins. In comparison, Walmart has a 1% profit margin. So the industry as a whole is not, it will cry saying this is a very low profit margin industry, when in fact that might be true for some small restaurants, and there are lots of ways we can help them, but it's not true for the industry as a whole. And there's lots of ways that we've created for consumers to support these good businesses and in general support a better food system for all. So there's 3 main things that we would like to ask of everybody who eats, everybody who's part of a good food system. The first is, please help build a buzz around the book. As I said, it's not just a book, it's our way to lift these issues to the national stage. It's our way to educate everybody we know about what's really happening behind the kitchen door. 2, please join the welcome table and ask everybody you know to join the welcome table, so that just as Moms Rising is an organization of 1 million moms who've come together and said, as mothers, we care about these issues, we can have 1 million people who eat and say, as eaters, As people who care about good food, we're gathering for a responsible food system. We can collectively have 1 million petitions go to Congress, first to raise the minimum wage, and I said later to say that pizza is actually not a vegetable. And 3, there's something you can do every time you eat out. So we've created something called the ROC National Diners Guide and smartphone app. And it's free, it's free, you can download it for free on your smartphone. You just put ROC National Diners Guide, and it locates where you are and tells you how the restaurants around you are faring in terms of wages, benefits like paid sick days, and promotions practices. It also provides gold and silver awards to restaurants that are doing it right, like Ziggerman's and Russell Street Deli and Good Girl Dinette in LA. So it will tell you who are the award winners around you, but the key thing for us is we didn't create the app or the guide to tell you where to eat and where not to eat, although we definitely want you to support the award winners in the guide. Unfortunately, there are not enough of them for us to say only eat at these 100 restaurants forever. We want you to eat out wherever you eat, continue to eat out, even in Olive Garden and Red Lobster. But at the end of your meal, we're asking that you get up and say something, just as you may have asked in the past about, is this local, is this organic? Please, at the end of your meal, say, I love the food, I love the service, I would love to see you pay more than $2.67, which is the tip minimum wage here in Michigan. Or I'd love to see you provide paid sick days. As a customer, that's important for me to keep coming. And if you're afraid to say something, there are sample tweets in the smartphone app. You can just tweet the manager or the owner at the end of your meal. You don't actually have to speak, but it'd be great if you could speak, because that's what's going to change our industry. And the last thing I'll say is, please don't leave today thinking that the best that you can do is tip better. I know I hear that a lot from people, you know, how should we tip? Should we tip better? How much should we tip? And yes, we want you to tip better because workers rely on your tips as their wages, but tipping better alone is not going to change this food system. It's going to take all of us coming together and demanding that this industry pay its own workers' wages rather than our tips paying these workers' wages. So the tip should be something we leave on top of a decent wage that provides somebody with a secure livelihood and allows them to not be homeless.
Those 3 steps are kind of the last thing. I know all the organizers are like beating down my back, and we're all going to be pulled off in just a second. But I wanted to just give Alberto and Oran one last chance to, are there any other kind of action steps, 1 line, 2 lines that you can leave us with? And we can continue the conversation during lunch, hopefully, but last things that either of you would add.
That's good, because I forgot the question anyway, so. No, basically, you know, there is a group, the Interagency Migrant Service Committee of Michigan, but it's made up of a coalition of service providers. And then there's the local migrant resource councils where there's service providers also, and they try to make sure that the farm workers, you know, are assisted in whichever way. In terms of political support or whatever, we really don't have a lot. There were a couple of state reps, Espinosa and Gonzalez, Croswell and Flint, that were very helpful, but they're gone now. So what I'd like to leave you with is you know, educate yourself if you could through the internet, Google, whatever, migrant seasonal farm workers, just so you know where your food is coming from and who's touching it first, and what their barriers are and how you might be able to get involved. Those local migrant resource councils, they're throughout the state. There's like 10 of them. I don't know if there's one here in Washtenaw County. But the other thing is just, you know, like everybody else has said, you know, we have to appreciate the people that are really doing the work, and a lot of times they're suffering folks. You know, when you have children being used to pick the berries because they're little and they'll pick the bottom of the trees and bushes and this and that, and in 90-degree weather, and it's getting hotter out there, and having heat strokes and such, and dying in silos because of gases that are in there. 2 teenagers, when we were doing the report, actually died, and others have too, adults, but those 2 teenagers, 16 and 17, shouldn't even have been in there. Okay, but just things like that. I mean, this is serious stuff. It's not just things, you know, I'm not just here because I like to drive through the snow, but thank you very much for having me here, and I appreciate you all listening to me.
I guess I would just wrap up with sort of an observation and attention that I sit with, having observed and been part of this building movement around local, organic, sustainable food and agriculture for 30 years or more. I can't agree with Saru more that this is about changing the system through changing policy. You cannot rely only on individual actions. You have to do both. And the individual action part around farm and food worker justice, I think, is really difficult. I think about what customers are actually willing to pay for food, and the difference between values and characteristics that are intrinsic to that food and extrinsic. So an intrinsic factor is like freshness, quality, taste, price, whether it's real or perceived. The way that that food was produced, the farmer who grew it, the worker that picked it, the workers that processed it, are really extrinsic qualities. And it's very difficult. I mean, I would venture to say many of us in this room would be willing to pay for extrinsic qualities because we care about the environment, we care about workers, and we'll do it. I mean, I'll do it. I'll pay more money, you know, sometimes than I ought to at the farmer's market because I want to support the farmers locally. It's more about the extrinsic quality of the food. What we have to realize is that we're not going to change the system by the, 1/10 of 1% of us who sit in this room that are willing to do that. That we have to figure out, I believe, both how to shift public policy and how to think through this issue of making the way the food was produced be perceived more as an intrinsic quality of that product and not something that is an external factor.
Thank you all again so much for joining us.
Hi, if we could have the people that are going to pitch an innovation or revisiting an innovation from last year, if you could sit up in the front here just to kind of make things run a little faster and a little more smoothly, I would appreciate it. I'm like really inspired, aren't you guys? Really excited about all the work people are doing this morning. I mean, these people leading the way, the work is amazing. I'm really inspired. We've had some awesome speakers this morning. Thank you, all of you. Okay, so my name's Courtney. I'm going to introduce to you the next little segment we have here before lunch. And it's looking at local food victories. We're going to revisit the past, and then we're going to kind of look to the future. So first we're going to revisit some of the old ones. Last year, people were asked, what would you like to see as next year's local food victories? So people came up, they had ideas, and wrote on signs, and got into different groups. And people started thinking and making things happen. That's why we're all here, because we want to make good things happen, right? So anyway, so they were here and they pitched an idea, and some people formed committees and they started working on those ideas. And after their groups met a few times and they started having, showing that they had documented progress, they applied for funding. So a couple of them have received funding, and we're going to go over those. And first we have Kim Bear. And she's going to talk about the Great Lakes CSA Coalition. So please welcome her.
So I'm hoping that the other folks who have worked on this will come up and help me through this, because I don't know what I'm going to say. So the idea that I pitched last year, sort of accidentally, was the idea that we need to start thinking about ways to create virtuous cycles, and we need to start thinking about the future that we want to have. And that's one thing that I'm really grateful about today, is that we're starting to think in more nuanced ways, in more systems level ways, in more ways that think about what our strengths are together. And so the idea, come on over here, help me. So the idea that I pitched was an idea that I had heard about that's happening in Wisconsin, where health insurance companies offer wellness rebates for people who are CSA members. And this has cascading benefits that I think are really important. So health insurance companies have a way to support local farms. They're good community stewards. People who are CSA members, it's documented, they eat more fruits and vegetables. They connect with their local farms. They are healthier. And farms get new CSA members and grow more food for people. And so that is the kind of virtuous cycle that I think that we need more of, because there are a lot of vicious cycles right now in the food system. And so in the past year, several of us have been getting together to meet very regularly. Jane Bush, Vicki Zilke, and Evan Dayringer have recently joined the board of what is now the Great Lakes CSA Coalition. There are several other members of our group that have helped with this. I don't know if they're in the audience. I was hoping that they'd be here today. Efforts like this are not something that anybody does alone. And so I'm so grateful for people like the people who are standing here beside me. And so what we decided to do was our first step was to create a CSA coalition here that would be a member organization for CSA farms. Vicki and Evan are members of the CSA farms. And so the coalition would be the entity that helps market CSAs, that raises money for people that can't afford CSAs, that holds a CSA fair, and that establishes standards of farm practice so that insurance companies and people would have confidence in the CSA farms. So we have now a Great Lakes CSA coalition. So we're applying for nonprofit status. Our next step, Jane has organized our first MEEP.
Michigan, MEEP stands for, it's the Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program. And you don't have to take a test. It's giving, we're using this, it's a state program, and it's facilitated by the National Conservation Resource Service, used to be the old Soil Conservation Service. It's a federal office under the USDA, but without getting too complicated here. It's providing a baseline of environmental assurances on the farm, and also a baseline of just a real baseline of food safety. It's a verification program. So, and Vicki is you're just going through the process right now. And on March 3rd, we're having an initial group MEEP workshop for any farmer that's interested in participating in this program. But it's going to be one of the qualifiers to assure that there's some baseline environmental standards and food safety standards on the farm. Do you want to say anything about that?
So the first.
I was just going to say, I think that one thing that MEEP provides is I know a lot of producers may be practicing organic, but don't have the funds, don't have the size of a business to be an organic certified farm. And so I think MEEP, certainly there are conventional farms that are MEEP certified, verified, but that at least gives you some sort of assurance so that when we go to the health insurance companies, we can say, yes, I don't have an organic certification, here are my practices, and I'm MEEP verified, so you know that I have this baseline.
So the coalition is in a pilot stage. We're establishing standards. We're gathering farms to be part of it. We're going to hold a CSA fair on March 24th at the Pittsfield Grange in the afternoon. We're looking for farms to sign up to be part of the CSA. We're calling it CSA Speed Dating. That's what Shannon Brines thought was a good name for it. And then some of our next steps include creating a presentation that we can make to health insurance companies to try to enlist them to offer wellness rebates to their participants. So in Wisconsin, what happens is if you have that insurance, you get $100 off toward your CSA membership. And if it's you and your partner, you each get $100 off. So that's like $200 toward your CSA membership.
So this opens up a whole new audience for CSA membership. It's a whole new market channel for farms, and it's just really exciting that way. So we're not talking to each other anymore. We're talking to.
Okay, I want to say one more thing. We have to get off the stage, but I want to say that part of the reason for doing this is that we want to emulate organizations like the Fair Food Network that are taking systemic approaches, and also Zingerman's that are thinking about the future that we want and trying to create the future that we want. So that's why we're here. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, next if I could have Colleen Crawley come up, please. Colleen is going to talk to us about Food Gatherers Farm Project and the Mindful Eating Coalition.
Thank you. So I'm Colleen Crawley. I represent the Mindful Eating Coalition, which is an umbrella for food-focused groups at First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor. And we advocate for food justice and human health, as well as for the benefit of food workers and animals, plants, and the environment. And a year ago, my pitch was basically help the Mindful Eating Coalition help food gatherers. And I talked about a project that we were trying to get going to save 1,200 pounds of fresh produce that was in jeopardy. The farmer who was producing this and donating it to food gatherers was suffering from severe health issues and couldn't maintain his property. And so I was looking both for volunteers and also for some advice, because I had no experience whatsoever in organizing or running a farm program. So after my pitch, about 10 people met with me and offered really good advice and suggestions, and I'm happy to report that the project was a really big success. We were shooting for 1,200 pounds. We, in fact, donated over 2,600 pounds to food gatherers. Thank you. And a couple other items. One aspect I didn't even know about the project was that the farmer also set up a small roadside stand, and in previous years he had donated up to $1,000 in cash donations from the sales at that stand to food gatherers, and we in fact raised almost $2,000 last year, so another big one. And then finally in November, on behalf of our project, the Food Gatherers Farm Project, real creative name there, Farmer Bill Schmidt, the property owner, and I accepted a Beacon of Light Award from the Food Bank Council of Michigan. So those were all really good, positive things that happened. I will say the project was no cakewalk for us. Our lack of experience was evident at every turn in the road, and the drought of 2012 really cost us a lot of problems that we weren't expecting. But our main problem last year was actually with rodents and deer. Not unlike our D-Town farm that Malik just shared with us. Our bean crop was completely devastated, and the carrots and greens were drastically reduced because of primarily rabbits, but deer as well. The property abuts a little wooded area. So when we heard about the applications for grants, we met with the farmer and determined that really fencing this property was the highest priority. And that's what we applied for and received the grant for. Timing is everything, however, and it was months after receiving the grant before we actually could round up the manpower and secure the materials and supplies. And by then, it was mid-November, and the ground was hard, and it was freezing cold, but I rounded up yet another group of volunteers. Men from our congregation came out on 2 Sundays. They worked to dig post holes in mostly frozen ground. They stretched the fencing, and we are hoping that this solution will keep pests away, and I'm happy to report that we're gearing up. Right now, we're already starting to meet for the project to continue in 2013. And so I want you all to wish us luck. And if you want to learn more about other creative ways that Food Gatherers is getting healthy food to low-income people in our community, we're doing a workshop at 1:30 in room 150. It's called Thinking Outside the Bok Choy. So hope you'll join us for that.
Thank you, Kim and Colleen and your crews for all the excellent work that you're doing. We do appreciate it. Next, we're going to look at this year. And we asked the same kind of thing this year to ask for different pitches for new innovations, but we asked with a little bit of a twist so that it fit with the theme of a fair food system. So this year we asked, do you have innovative ideas that will help build a fair food system in Washtenaw County? And we had a few ideas, obviously. First, I would like to introduce to you Ava Havercorn-Halm. Sorry if are you here? I'm here. Okay. And sorry if I didn't get your name exactly correct, but so she's going to talk about universally designed community gardens, making the food security movement accessible to all. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Ava. I am the Sports and Recreation Coordinator at the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living. And I also, thank you. I also coordinate our community garden. If you don't know, we have the only completely inclusive, completely free, and completely organic community garden in Washtenaw County. And it's open to the entire community. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, and the pictures you see are pictures from our garden and our garden's participants. And so I'm going to talk about why inclusive community gardening is so important. So we've heard a lot today about equitable access to resources. However, the amount of accessible and inclusive community gardens around the nation is sorely lacking. Currently, there's no ADA laws that make community gardens accessible, so they just aren't. And community gardens have been cited as one solution to the problem of food security. However, people with disabilities cannot access, well, a majority of people with disabilities, I'm not going to generalize, cannot access community gardens that aren't accessible due to pathways or garden bed heights, due to inaccessible locations, due to fees or untrained gardening staff. And people with disabilities, statistically as a population, are among the most impoverished people. And we do suffer from a lack of food insecurity, a lack of food access, and a lack of an adequate food landscape, all of which can be helped by an accessible world, really. But to start, we want to just look at accessible community gardens. And now I'm not actually going with my slideshow, but what you're looking at are pictures of our community gardening program. And through our community gardening program, we have been able to help our gardeners get increased access to vegetables, get increased nutritional knowledge, get an increased social network, and through our community's partnerships, we've also helped the community get an increased sense of disability awareness. And I just wanted to mention that our community garden, we run on the solidarity model and not the charity model. So there may be some community gardens that are accessible, but they typically are just, they're labeled like the gardens for people with disabilities or special needs gardens and stuff like that. And our garden is inclusive. That means that people with and without disabilities garden side by side as peers. And so I think that to reinvent a fair food system, we also have to look at the spaces we're giving our population of people to garden. We have to look at, are those spaces accessible for everyone? And who's not at the table, basically, and who doesn't have access to these resources. And I have a table talk after this, and if you want to learn more about our community garden, you can come to the table talk. Also, you can just go to the AnnArborCIL.org, and that's one way to learn about our garden as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ava. Okay, so next we have Tia and Catherine. I don't know which of you is coming up first. And she's going to be talking on less is more. She'll give us the details.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name's Tia. I'm out here on behalf of the Less is More Coalition. I'm the Michigan organizer with Food and Water Watch. So we're a diverse coalition of a lot of groups. Our slogan up here is less support to factory farms means a more sustainable Michigan. So our newest campaign that we actually just launched, turn this off, just launched last week is called Restoring the Balance to Michigan's Farming Landscape. What we're seeking to do really is to level the playing field for sustainable farmers in Michigan. And obviously that's a huge task, and everything that we're doing kind of as a collective is working towards this. But our one policy piece is really what we're focusing on. So again, we believe less support for factory farms is going to increase our sustainability here in Michigan. Here's a list of all of our members. So we're a diverse group. So the problem that we really see right now is, we have an unfair playing field. I heard talk about, we can't shop our way out of this problem, and that's something that we really believe in this coalition as well. So we as consumers are consistently and increasingly seeking out local, organic, and sustainably grown food. However, there's a systematic unfair market that's set up so that our small farmers, our sustainable farmers, can't flourish. So what we're doing is we're urging policymakers to level the playing field, and I will now get into what that means. So quickly, I'm just gonna kind of describe, before I jump into this, what we're talking about. So when we look at the Farm Bill, it's a ton of money that's coming in from the federal level. And we get a piece of it in Michigan, and then we can decide, or our state conservationists can decide, how to allocate those funds. And right now, the funds that are coming in are largely going to CAFOs, to factory farms, and a lot of the funds are specifically allocated for things like building manure pits, which sustainable farms aren't going to have. However, so it's pretty much like earmarked for these big farms. What we're doing is we're asking the state conservationists through a grassroots effort to change the priorities, to shift how we're thinking about how we're spending these federal farms, and instead of mitigating the problem and rewarding polluters and paying for their mess, we're actually taking those funds to support the solution, to support sustainable agriculture, and to support our small farmers. How we're doing this. So state conservationist Gary Lee, he has the authority to restore the balance with input from the state technical committee. So one thing that we're doing here today is Catherine and I will be around. We have a petition. We've already sent over 1,000 emails to him through our different groups and organizations, letting him know that as Michiganders, we want our taxpayer dollars supporting small, sustainable, organic farmers, propping up the solutions, not rewarding the polluters. So there are a couple things you can do. Definitely check. We have these beautiful petitions that are letters to Gary Lee. So please find us, stop by our table, and give him a sign, ask us questions. And then another thing, get involved. Our website is moreformichigan.org, where you can learn more, you can read our white paper, you can dig in a little bit deeper to these issues. So again, feel free to take down my contact information. Go to our website, like us on Facebook. That's a new thing that happened this week. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tia. Carrie. Next we have Carrie Jr., and he's right here, so he'll tell you quickly before lunch what we've got in store.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I was told my presentation is you guys have my presentation between this and your lunch, so I hope your stomach can hold off just a second. Again, my name is Carrie Jr. I'm wearing several hats here. Just to give you a quick background, I'm actually a construction engineer, but I love economic development. So I got involved with economic development in my community, so I started a farmer's market. And when I got a farmer's market, I realized I couldn't find farmers. So I did some research trying to find farmers, and particularly I was looking for farmers of color because of my community. We discovered them, found out they weren't getting their product out, found out there were several reasons. And I said, you know what, maybe see what I could do to kind of help them get their products going. At the same time, as I got involved with a lot of this stuff, I came involved with the state with the Michigan Food Hub Network. So I'm also a Food Hub Network representative for the Southeast region. Thank you. That's a plug. Anyway, so I'm just going to give you a rough idea of what we're trying to do. This is pretty much the objective of our group. I don't want to try to read all of these things, but I'm trying to say, yeah, we're trying to address the issues of local economic vitality and sustainability by empowering the underserved limited resource farmer to serve the underserved community, to encourage the community with job and or entrepreneurial activities, and to influence the community to consciously consume these products with economic health and economics in mind, therefore completing a food system. And I don't want to really, you all are the genius, you all know what a food system is. That's just pretty much put the parts up there, the different components of it. And that's pretty much the model we're looking at trying to do. Hopefully with our farms, our hoop houses, and with land, we're able to transport the items to either get into some kind of process in the future and then eventually to different markets in the city. And whether it's farmers markets, schools, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the issues that we find, at least we know within the black community, and I'm trying to be politically correct when I say black, because when I grew up, we were black. On my birth certificate, it says Negro. On my dad's, it says colored. Then we had African American, and now it's people of color, so I'm getting kind of confused bouncing around. but what I have here is a map of the Detroit area and the food deserts. Now, the pink area at the top, which is sort of the area where I am, that's considered the main area of the food deserts in Detroit. Now, incidentally, the farmers market for which we're going to work with, we're pretty much surrounding that area. We have the Windmill Market, my market, Royal Town Farmers Market, the Highland Park Market, and then Oakland Avenue Market. And the reason we chose those markets committed to use our farmers' produce on a regular basis. And that's the name of the group that we sort of organized, and again, this is just an illustration because I think some of the guys, they haven't really approved it, and if you've seen some of this before, somewhere online, that's where we got it from, just to give it a look. But our motto is the underserved farmers serving the underserved community. And see, and ultimately what we want to do, again, like I said, this is where we are now, what we're doing. I can read it. See, we're identifying institutional buyers, and again, I've already talked to people who are interested in getting our products. But as you know, a farmer's market, at least those who've been involved with it, can't sustain the farmers. They won't be able to get all the products that they produce and get them sold. So we need to find some institution that consistently buy their product, and then hopefully the aftermath will go to the farmers market or whoever else. I mentioned the Farmers Market Alliance. Those are the farmers markets I just mentioned that sort of in the area of the food desert. Again, we're still working on organizing the group. It started off with about 5 farmers. Now we're probably at 12. And we think we're probably, at our next meeting, I expect to see maybe 15 to 16 with a total of roughly anywhere between, I think, 150 to 200 acres to work with. Again, just like any other co-op, there's farmer training we're going to try to get together, and then the logistics. Because one of the things they always said, we can grow the stuff and we can harvest it, but we can't afford to get it to the markets, the Eastern market or whoever. And then a lot of them would have food stands, but if you're on one road and there are 7 other farmers and everybody has food stands, it's a lot of competition. So we tell them there are a lot of markets out there that we think they can get their products in. It just matters to help them get it there. Again, I mentioned membership recruitment. I mentioned how many members we had there. And of course, we're collaborating with a nonprofit organization that are already in Detroit. They're really excited because some of them, the Highland Park was in the process of starting the farmers market, so this worked out. Actually, the Detroit Black Food Security Network is also one of the people we're talking with. And there are 2 or 3 other nonprofits in the area that want to help out. And again, we also identify funding support. Again, and the main thing also I wanted to mention was, there's a lot of money being invested in the area talking about food security and health and nutrition. But the issue I have is you can talk to a child or somebody about health and nutrition, but again, if you don't have the economic part in there, it's going to make it very hard. So in other words, we're hoping throughout our co-op, we can produce job opportunities, whether it's jobs or entrepreneurial opportunities. So then they make you more conscious of what you're eating and what you're doing, and also it will support the system. Now it will support themselves. And I'm talking real fast because, again, I hear stomachs growling. But anyway, that's briefly what my report is on. That's my contact information. Unfortunately, I won't be here for a table discussion because I got to get back to a meeting in Detroit. But I'd love to talk to anybody about what we're trying to do, and hopefully a year from now, we've actually got this thing moving. And I mentioned, again, the organization for underserved farmers. Ideally, we love to have every small farmer, once we get things moving, going to be able to help them get their products to wherever our markets or whoever else. But, and as a matter of fact, two other organizations we're talking, there's an organization of Latino farmers that's west of us. But then also there's a group of Hmong farmers who are actually in the city of Detroit. We're trying to get them involved as well. But anyway, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much. And like he said, he's not going to be able to stick around. Go ahead and flip that back. So if you want to get in contact, go ahead and write down his information now. And I'm sure he would appreciate it. So thank you so much to all of our innovators, past and present, for all of your hard work and your inspiration and all that good stuff. I have a couple of announcements to make if you would want to come up here for just a second.
Thanks. Yeah, I know everybody's hungry. This will be quick. I want everybody here to know that there's something called the Washtenaw Food Policy Council that is new and has been formed by the county government. We've heard a lot of great efforts going on here today, and we've heard a lot about the need for policy, both local government, state, and federal policy. Well, here, the Board of Commissioners recently empowered a council of volunteers here in the county, and there's 15 people on it. And it is here to form policy about the food system here in the county. So most of you are county residents, and it is for you. It is for this county. All of the meetings are public. There are 5 policy action teams: access, food waste, healthy eating and education, farms and farmers, and what did I miss? Planning and zoning, yes. Don't let me forget that one, Amanda. Geez, I hope everybody heard that. So there's a meeting coming up on March the 6th that I'd like you to know about, and there's also a breakout session later on today at 2:30. And so anybody who wants to have some input into food policy for this county and the future of making things better for the food system here, please get involved and see me. Or Michelle Raymond is here, and so is Lindsay Scalera, and so is Sharon Sheldon, And who else was raising their hand back there? Anyway, come to the breakout session if nothing else. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Also, if you would like to, you can join the rest of our innovators and some of other people who have also excellent ideas and would like to share with everybody ideas and talk and that kind of thing. At lunch, there's some tables out there, and they're kind of designated with certain topics. So if it's a topic that interests you and you want to network and talk and help, feel free to join those tables. Along with the innovations that you already heard, there's going to be a couple other table topics. A couple of them, I'm going to just kind of give you a little brief description, is Anna Dawson. She's going to talk about Freezing the Harvest, 21st Century Style. The project seeks to empower rural and urban community kitchen cooks to meet consumers' health and convenience needs through the production of tray, frozen, and vacuum-packed local food products sold online and distributed year-round by knowledgeable salespeople. And then also Linda Tenza of the Farmers Market Art Project. She wants to depict the joys of food and farming, and she'd like to do this on the ceiling of the Ann Arbor Farmers Market so that it looks kind of like the Sistine Chapel. So if you'd like to join some of those ideas, please find their tables out there. There's a couple other topics: farm to institution, fair working conditions and fair pay, food labeling and GMOs, food sharing, entrepreneurship, water security, sustainable food, urban agriculture, nutrition and food as medicine, food hubs in Michigan, food access and food security, and garden-based education. Of course, you can also just sit and chat and catch up with old friends if you'd like to also. A couple more things to mention. Saru will have a table with books out near the registration area. Please talk to her, get a book, get it signed, join her team. And also, if you are a registered dietitian, there are papers over by the registration table for you to kind of just keep track of what you learned today, because you may be eligible for continuing education credits. If you have questions, please see me. It's time for lunch. When you get out there, please sit down. We're going to be releasing by table for lunch, and enjoy. Thank you.